ចឹងខ្ញុំបាទសូមជំរាបសួរខ្ញុំលីធៀងជាអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលនៅក្នុងកម្មវិធីថ្ងៃនេះហើយពិតជាមានសេចក្តីរីករាយដែលអ្នកចូលរួមរបស់យើងថ្ងៃនេះមានការចាប់អារម្មណ៍ក្នុងការស្វែងយល់បន្ថែមអំពីប្រធានបទរបស់យើងទាក់ទងនឹងការផ្សព្វផ្សាយព័ត៌មានបែបវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហើយកម្មវិធីបន្តបដានៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះដែរគឺត្រូវបានរៀបចំឡើងដោយគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គដែលគម្រោងនេះគឺមានការរៀបចំនិងសហការធ្វើការងាររួមគ្នារវាងរដ្ឋបាលជលផលហើយនិងសាកលវិទ្យាល័យផ្សេងៗមានដូចជាសាកលវិទ្យាល័យ Nevada សាកលវិទ្យាល័យ Sydney សាកលវិទ្យាល័យ Utah State សាកលវិទ្យាល័យ California សមាគមគ្រូបង្រៀនផ្នែកវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រក្រុមហ៊ុន FISHBIO ហើយនិង Eco យុវទូតដែលគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គត្រូវបានគាំទ្រដោយជំនួយពីប្រជាពលរដ្ឋអាមេរិក USAID ហើយនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះដែរគឺជាវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលទី1ដែលក្នុងចំណោមវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលជាច្រើនទៀតដែលយើងនឹងរៀបចំដែលក្នុងនោះផងដែរនឹងមានវគ្គទាក់ទងនឹងការរៀនថតរូបរៀនផលិតវីដេអូហើយនឹងការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវទៅលើផ្នែកត្រីហើយនឹងគុណភាពទឹកជាដើមហេតុនេះដើម្បីជាកិច្ចចាប់ផ្ដើមកម្មវិធីខ្ញុំអាចសូមអញ្ជើញបងសិលាដែលជាអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គឡើងមានចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍ក្នុងកម្មវិធី
Should we have a quick translation from somebody? Somebody?
សួស្តីទាំងអស់គ្នាអត់ទាន់បានប្រាប់ថាខ្ញុំអ្នកបកប្រែប៉ុន្តែដោយសារតែ training នឹងធ្វើជាភាសាអង់គ្លេសហើយអ្នកចូលរួមសិក្ខាកាមគាត់ជាជាតិខ្មែរដើម្បីឲ្យទាំងអស់គ្នាយល់បានរៀងស៊ីជម្រៅចឹងបានយើងមានអ្នកបកប្រែ Erin Lowry provided a quick introduction of what the training is all about and that we have a range of organization involved, especially university, and the project is funded by USAID.
ចឹងអាចជើញអរគុណបងសាមឌីហើយចឹងអាចជើញបងសិលាមានចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍ចូលរួមក្នុងកម្មវិធី
ជាដំបូងខ្ញុំសូមជំរាបសួរទាំងអស់គ្នាអ្នកចូលរួមទាំងអស់គ្នាខ្ញុំឈ្មោះជាសិលាខ្ញុំគឺជាអ្នកគ្រប់គ្រងនិងសម្របសម្រួលគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គដែលមានទីតាំងនៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយខ្ញុំសូមថ្លែងអំណរគុណទៅដល់អ្នករៀបចំកម្មវិធីខាង Eco យុវទូតក៏ដូចជាខាង Erin មកពីខាងក្រុមហ៊ុន FISHBIO ដែលគាត់មានបទពិសោធន៍ហើយរៀបចំវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលថ្ងៃនេះឡើងហើយដោយលីខៀងគាត់បានរៀបរាប់ខាងមុនខាងដើមចឹងថាគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គនៅក្នុងខែកញ្ញាឆ្នាំ2021នេះគឺយើងមានវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលជាច្រើនដែលបានរៀបចំឡើងសម្រាប់ឲ្យទស្សបានន័យថាអ្នកចូលរួមទាំងអស់គ្នាចាប់អារម្មណ៍វគ្គមួយណាអាចជ្រើសរើសបានហើយតំណាងឲ្យខាងគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គខ្ញុំសូមថ្លែងអំណរគុណទៅដល់អ្នកចូលរួមទាំងអស់គ្នាដែលបានចាប់អារម្មណ៍ហើយចុះឈ្មោះចូលរួមវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលនេះហើយយើងនៅមានវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលជាច្រើនទៀតដែលមាន3វគ្គទៀតដែលយើងនៅបន្តចុះឈ្មោះហើយអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាអាចចូលរួមចែកម្លែកទៅដល់មិត្តភ័ក្តិទាំងអស់គ្នាផ្សេងៗទៀតដែលគាត់អត់បានចុះឈ្មោះហើយបើសិនជាក្រោយពីបញ្ចប់វគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលដែលបង្ហាត់បង្រៀនដោយErin Lowry នៅថ្ងៃនេះហើយបើសិនជាអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាអាចសរសេរជាសាច់រឿងហើយចាប់អារម្មណ៍ថាចង់ផុសនៅក្នុងបណ្ដាមេគង្គ Facebook page អាចផ្ញើមកដល់ក្រុមការងារពួកខ្ញុំហើយពួកខ្ញុំនឹងធ្វើការត្រួតពិនិត្យមើលហើយនឹងគិតមើលចង់ឲ្យពិសេសមកជួយធ្វើ freelance ពេលខ្លះចឹងណាបងមិនថាជួយអីគឺឲ្យគាត់Okay. So
ចេញតបាន
Okay ចាអញ្ចឹងអរគុណច្រើនហើយអរគុណច្រើនហើយសង្ឃឹមថាវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលថ្ងៃនេះអ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នានឹងទទួលបានចំណេះដឹងច្រើនហើយមានសំណួរសួរកុំទុកត្រឡប់ទៅផ្ទះវិញហើយនៅឆ្ងល់ដដែលអរគុណច្រើនអរគុណ
អរគុណច្រើនបងហើយអញ្ចឹងហ្នឹងហើយអញ្ចឹងមុនអាច somebody.
Wonders of the Mekong would like to welcome everyone to the training, and thank you so much to YA and FISHBIO as an organizer and provide in such an intensive training. And there's a series of training in September, as you can see in Wonders of the Mekong Facebook page. So there's 3 more training left that is still open for registration. Please go ahead and register if you're interested. And after today's training, if there's any story you have written and think that is very important and want to have it posted on our Facebook page, please send to us and we will have a look and verify and have it posted for you or further communications needed. Yeah, welcome to the training.
អញ្ចឹងមុននឹងឈានទៅដល់ដំណើរការវគ្គប្រពដារបស់យើងនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះខ្ញុំអាចសូមអនុញ្ញាតឲ្យចូលរួមទាំងអស់បែបវីដេអូដើម្បីយើងអាចថតរូប
Okay, please turn on your camera for photo section. Everyone. Anh đọc mà bàn ớt văn nạ mập xong thọt rụt plate xong chơi từng ốc này anh bao camera ở một plate tới hơi dân ở thọt rụt chung kia muối hai trăm chặt đá vẹo đọc đá. Okay.
Đại sống chăm thì càng ngày tập trung thọt.
Còn càng nghe rõ môi bị bay phong ơi nãy châu luôn gọi là nhầm tích.
Okay, chẳng bay đi mùi hold smile for 10 seconds. Muốn về để screenshot khúc kia này. Chẳng này sao thì dạy về nhân thì dạy về đọc vì một tí. Và áp con tràn dân tẹt tôn nâng thực hiện đọc bọtในក្នុងវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះខ្ញុំជឿថាបងប្អូនប្រកាសជាបែរជាជួបធ្លាប់ជួបការពិបាកដូចគ្នាតកតងនឹងការផ្សព្វផ្សាយព័ត៌មានវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រដែលស្ថាប័នឬក៏កន្លែងការងារយើងមានហើយពេលថាយើងចង់ផ្សព្វផ្សាយទៅសាធារណជនពេលខ្លះវាហាក់ដូចជាព័ត៌មានដែលយើងមានវាច្រើនពេកវាស៊ីជម្រៅពេកដែលសាធារណជនគាត់ពិបាកយល់បានដូច្នេះហើយបានជានៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះគឺយើងធ្វើវគ្គបន្តបណ្ដានេះឡើងគឺដើម្បីយើងគិតថាតើក្នុងព័ត៌មានពីការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវរបស់យើងដែលមានសរសេរចេញមក50 60ទំព័រ100ទំព័រអីហ្នឹងតើយើងអាចច្បិចយកខ្លឹមសារកន្លែងណាដែលសំខាន់ហើយតើយើងត្រូវដាក់សារយ៉ាងម៉េចដើម្បីឲ្យខ្លីខ្លឹមហើយវាអាចសមស្របទៅនឹងបរិបទនៃការចំណេះដឹងហើយនឹងការយល់ឃើញរបស់ប្រជាជនដែលជាក្រុមគោលដៅដែលយើងក្នុងការផ្សព្វផ្សាយផងដែរអញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះយើងមានអ្នកបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលរបស់យើងគឺស្រី Erin Lowry ដែលគាត់ជានាយកខាងផ្នែកទំនាក់ទំនងរបស់ក្រុមហ៊ុនស្រាវជ្រាវផ្នែកជលផលពីខាង FISHBIO ដែលលោកស្រីមានបទពិសោធន៍ជាង10ឆ្នាំនៅក្នុងកិច្ចការងារផ្សព្វផ្សាយពីព័ត៌មានបែបវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រតាមរយៈការសរសេររូបភាពផលិតរូបភាពធ្វើជាវីដេអូនិងការធ្វើបទបង្ហាញហើយសប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃលោកស្រីក៏ជាអ្នកគ្រប់គ្រង page របស់គម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គហើយនិង website Mekong Fish Network ផងដែរហើយការងាររបស់លោកស្រីក៏ត្រូវបានបោះពុម្ពឡើងនៅលើទស្សនាវដ្តីវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រ website Mongkabay ហើយនិង Los Angeles Times ផងដែរ
The training is aimed to provide. We understand that there's a lot of difficulty for journalists or to write anything related to science to communicate scientific information to regular people because it can be too much information or it's too technical and it's hard to convey the meaning. This is why today's training is taking place, and we have Miss Erin Lowry as our trainer today. She has a lot of great experience with conveying the scientific information into a new story. She has she's the communication director for FISHBIO. She's taking care of our Wonders of the Mekong Facebook page. She handles Mekong Fish Network. So there's a lot of scientific communication that Erin has done.
បាទហើយអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំរំភើបនៅក្នុងថ្ងៃនេះផងដែរឃើញថាអ្នកចូលរួមគឺយើងមានដល់រហូតដល់60នាក់ជាងហើយពីសមាជិកភាពវិញយើងឃើញថាមានទាំងមន្ត្រីមកពីខាងរដ្ឋាភិបាលខាងជលផលក៏មានអ្នកអញ្ជើញមកពីខាងអង្គការសង្គមស៊ីវិលមានមកពីខាងសាកលវិទ្យាល័យហើយក៏មានសិស្សនិស្សិតមកពីខាងសាកលវិទ្យាល័យហើយក៏មានសិស្សដែលគាត់មកពីខាងវិទ្យាល័យផងដែរអញ្ចឹងបានន័យថាឃើញថាប្រធានបទនេះមានការចាប់អារម្មណ៍ច្រើនពីអ្នកធ្វើការសិស្សនិស្សិតមកពីច្រើនមជ្ឈដ្ឋានមែនទែន
We are very excited to learn that there's up to 62 participants right now coming from various backgrounds such as the government, fishery administration, non-profit organizations, students, even high school students. So this topic looks like it's very interesting for everyone.
So អញ្ចឹងដើម្បីកុំឲ្យរំចាំយូរអញ្ចឹងអាចសូមបកគោលនីតិទៅស្រី Erin Lowry.
King, maybe we can talk about Zoom ethics a bit.
Okay សូមអធិស្ឋានហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំអាចសូមអនុញ្ញាតវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលនេះគឺយើង record សម្រាប់ដើម្បីផ្ញើជូនសិក្ខាកាមហើយនឹងក្រុមការងាររបស់សិក្ខាកាមបើសិនជាគាត់ចង់យកវីដេអូនេះរៀនសូត្រដែលគាត់បានចូលរួមគាត់ចង់រៀនសូត្រអញ្ចឹងយើងសូមការអនុញ្ញាតថតវីដេអូ training នេះហើយបើសិនជាបងប្អូនមានបញ្ហាទាក់ទងមកក្រុមការងាររបស់យើងវិញបានហើយលើពីនេះអាចសូមនៅពេលដែលយើងធ្វើការបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលអញ្ចឹងសម្រាប់សិក្ខាកាមរបស់យើងគាត់អាចបិទសំឡេងដើម្បីកុំឲ្យមានសំឡេងរំខានហើយប្រសិនបើសិក្ខាកាមមានសំណួរឬក៏មានមតិយោបល់នៅក្នុងពេលដែលវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលនេះគឺអាចសួរបានភ្លាមតាមរយៈ chat ឬក៏យើងអាចលើកដៃអញ្ចឹងអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលក៏ដូចជាគ្រូបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលគាត់នឹងអាចផ្ដល់នីតិសម្រាប់ឲ្យអ្នកចូលរួមរបស់យើងក្នុងការសួរឬក៏មានយោបល់បាទហើយនឹងឯដើម្បីអាចស្រួលស្វែងយល់បន្ថែមទៀតអញ្ចឹងអាចសូមអ្នកចូលរួមជួយសរសេរឈ្មោះជួយ rename ឈ្មោះនៅក្នុង Zoom ហ្នឹងហើយនឹងដាក់ឈ្មោះស្ថាប័ននៅពីក្រោយផងដើម្បីយើងអាចដឹងថាសិក្ខាកាមចេញមកពីខាងណាអញ្ចឹងមានប៉ុណ្នេះតាក់ទងនឹងព័ត៌មានតាក់ទង Zoom ហើយសូមបកគោទូនីតិទៅអ្នកបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាល
Yeah, there are a few Zoom ethics to mention here. If you have any question, you can raise your hand in the or post the question in the chat box. We have our team to monitor the questions. And please have yourself muted. And yeah, welcome to please welcome Miss Erin Lowry.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that great introduction, and thank you all for joining today. It's great to see so many of you. I'll go ahead and bring up my presentation. I'm looking forward to talking about this topic that's one of my my favorite topics to talk about. A little bit more about my background. I'm trained as a scientist as well as a science communicator. So I have a master's in marine biology or fish biology, as well as a master's in science communication. So I have experience talking about science with other scientists and then also talking about science with non-scientists. And so through that experience, I understand that there's sort of a different language and a technique that you have to use when you're talking about a technical topic such as science. So we'll be covering that today. And just so two disclaimers, I suppose, before we start. One is that I'll be sharing my experience and perspective as a writer in the United States and writing in English. So there might be some differences in how you might interpret this in Khmer, but this is just based on my experience, communicating to a Western audience. And then the second is that we'll have a focus on the type of science we'll be focusing on is primarily environmental science and with a emphasis on conservation, because that's a focus of the Wonders of the Mekong project.
Erin គាត់មានបទពិសោធន៍ច្រើនតើតងជាមួយដោយសារគាត់ជា biologist ជាជីវវិទូហើយគាត់ធ្វើការខាង communication នឹងជាច្រើនឆ្នាំអញ្ចឹងប្រធានបទនេះជាប្រធានបទមួយដែលគាត់ជួយធ្វើការហើយវាតកតងនឹងអីដែលគាត់កំពុងធ្វើប៉ុន្តែចង់បញ្ជាក់ផងដែរថា training នេះធ្វើឡើងដោយ reflect ឬសរបញ្ជាក់ពីបទពិសោធន៍ដែលគាត់ធ្វើនៅសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកធ្វើភាសាអង់គ្លេសអញ្ចឹងវាអាចរៀងខុសគ្នាពីភាសាខ្មែរយើងបន្តិចបន្តួចហើយដោយសារតែគម្រោង Wonder of the Mekong ធ្វើតកតងជាមួយនឹងបរិស្ថានជាមួយជលផលជាមួយការងារអភិរក្សអញ្ចឹង focus អីដែលយើងផ្ដោតសំខាន់លើថ្ងៃហ្នឹងគឺនិយាយពីការងារបរិស្ថានហើយនិងអភិរក្ស
Right, so this is just an overview of what we'll be covering today. So the first part, I'll be talking a bit about the techniques to communicate, in particular talking about what science means, and then interpreting how it works. All right. And then the second part will be talking about the structure of a scientific study and how we can, can we just ask all participants to please mute themselves? I'm getting some background noise.
សូមជួយបញ្យល់ទាំងអស់គ្នាបានទេអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាចូលថ្មីសូមបញ្យល់ខ្លួនឯងទៅបើសិនជាក្រុមការងារអត់ទាន់បានបញ្យល់ណាកុំឲ្យមានសម្លេងរំខានអរគុណច្រើន Go ahead, Erin.
Great. So yeah, the second part of this training will talk about the structure of a scientific study or report and how we might communicate that. Then we'll talk about how to structure a social media post based on a scientific study or project. And then in the last part of the training, we'll talk about communicating messages to different audiences. And we're hoping to do a hands-on breakout session to get some practice with coming up with messages for specific audiences.
របៀបរយៈគឺគាត់ចំណាននៅក្នុង training ហ្នឹងគឺយើងមាន 4 ចំណុចដែលយើងឃើញនៅក្នុង slide ហ្នឹងគឺ communicating science និយាយពីរបៀបធ្វើការតំណែងការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រយើងចែកចាយព័ត៌មាននឹងតាមរបៀបណាបែបណាស្វែងយល់វាធ្វើម៉េចហើយធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យអ្នកដែលយើងចែកចាយទៅនឹងយល់ហើយនិយាយពី structure និយាយពីរបៀបទៅសេថារបៀបបង្ហាញថាការងារស្រាវជ្រាវឬក៏ paper មួយការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគាត់សរសេរបែបណាហើយអ្នកខ្សែរបៀបសរសេរបែបណាវាខុសគ្នាមិនខ្លះហើយចុងក្រោយគឺរបៀបដែលយើងនាំសារតកតងមួយការងារអភិរក្សហ្នឹងទៅកាន់ដូចក្រុមគោលដៅរបស់យើង the right audience ហើយចុងក្រោយយើងក៏មានលំហាត់ឬក៏កិច្ចការដែលយើងធ្វើជុំគ្នានៅក្នុង Zoom នឹងថាតើយើងយល់បានកម្រិតណា
Great, and I'll just add that if you have questions while we're going through the training, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to check in periodically to see if we have questions, and then we'll also have some set Q&A sessions towards the end of the presentation. But yeah, feel free to share your questions if you have them.
អញ្ចឹងម្ដងទៀតបើសិនជាមានសំណួរអាចលើកដៃនៅក្នុងកន្លែង reaction ហ្នឹងមានកន្លែងលើកដៃអញ្ចឹងអាចចុចកន្លែងលើកដៃហ្នឹងទៅក្រុមការងារនឹង លើកឡើងឈ្មោះឲ្យគាត់អាចនិយាយបានហើយមួយទៀតបើមិនជាបានលើកដៃទៅអាចសរសេរនៅក្នុង chat ហ្មងទៅបើចង់និយាយផ្ទាល់ណាអញ្ចឹងបាច់ចាំតតែចប់ training ឬក៏អីទេ
So oops, this is the first slide here is how I think of communicating science. So this picture is from some salmon in California, where I'm based, and a lot of the work that I do is related to the science of fish, and particularly salmon. And I think about science communication or translating science as a way of opening a window for your reader or for your audience into the world of science. So science is kind of its own community and its own process that not many people are familiar with or understand if they didn't study science or aren't familiar with it. And so by sharing stories about science, it's a way of bringing people into the process of how we do research and why it's important. So that's why I like this window metaphor, and you're sort of the guide that's helping people enter into this different world.
តាមពិតពេលដែលយើងមើលទៅលើការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រគឺការវាមើលទៅដូចនៅក្នុងពិភពលោកមួយតែឯងដាច់ពីគេអញ្ចឹងណាព្រោះมันមានមនុស្សច្រើនទេដែលចង់ស្វែងយល់ហើយការដែលស្វែងយល់នឹងវាស៊ីពេលហើយវាពិបាកអញ្ចឹងបានពេលដែលយើងបកស្រាយការងារទាក់ទងជាមួយការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគឺដូចបើកួចឬក៏បើកពិភពលោកយើងហ្នឹងឲ្យអ្នកដែលគាត់អត់មានចំណេះដឹងតាក់ទងនឹងអាហ្នឹងហើយនឹងអត់សូវគិតថានឹងសំខាន់ងាកមកមើលថាវាមានអីតាក់ទងជាមួយគាត់ហើយមានអីដែលធ្វើឲ្យគាត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍ខ្លះ
Right, so first let's talk about why is communicating science important. Well, and it's important because science and research, the research process, are a way of finding out important information about all kinds of things. It could be about human health, or about the environment, or about wildlife. That's a particular focus for the Wonders of the Mekong project, is talking about Cambodia's rich natural history and biodiversity and how we can conserve it. But science is basically a process of asking questions and understanding how the world works. And so by answering those questions, it can help us what we need to conserve from environmental standpoint.
អញ្ចឹងតាមពិតជាទូទៅពេលដែលការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវបែបវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រគឺជាការប្រមូលព័ត៌មានសំខាន់ឧទាហរណ៍យើងមើលទៅលើថា human health ហ្នឹងគឺសុខភាពប្រជាជនបរិស្ថានឬក៏តាក់ទងមួយសត្វព្រៃ wildlife ដែលជាការងារដែល Wonder of the Mekong កំពុងធ្វើអញ្ចឹងការងារស្រាវជ្រាវខាងផ្នែកបរិស្ថានហ្នឹងគឺវាជាដំណើរនៃការស្វែងយល់ថាពិភពលោកធ្វើការងារពិភពលោកនោះវាមានអីខ្លះធ្វើបែបណាហើយជួយឲ្យយើងយល់ថាយើងមានទូនីតិឬក៏យើងអាចធ្វើអីខ្លះដើម្បីអភិរក្សវា
But some of the reasons why people might not understand or appreciate science are for a couple of reasons. One is that science can be like a foreign language because the words that scientists use can be very technical, and that can feel very foreign to people, and so they might not understand what does science mean. And then the other part is that science can be a foreign process for people. They might not understand how it works and how do we actually find these answers to these questions that we're asking. How can we use science to do that? So if people don't understand, then they might not care about what we can learn from science and why this process is important.
បើសួរថាតើមិនបានយើងត្រូវមិនបានពាក្យច្រើនមនុស្សអត់ទាន់យល់ថាវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រនឹងវាបែបណាតាមពិតដោយសារថាការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគឺវាប្រៀបដូចជាភាសាបរទេសមួយអញ្ចឹងពេលយើងស្ដាប់បើយើងអត់ចេះភាសាហ្នឹងទេយើងស្ដាប់អត់យល់ទេអត់ដឹងថាវាមានន័យថាម៉េចហើយដូចដំណើរការមួយដែលដូចមិនដឹងនិយាយទៅដូច alien ដូចមកពីភពផ្កាយអញ្ចឹងវាមិនដឹងថាគេធ្វើមិនទេការងារហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើងអត់យល់ផងយើងទ្រាំធ្វើឲ្យយើងខ្វល់ពីវាទៅអត់រួចទេ
So this is why the role of a science communicator is so important. So science communication is the way of translating and interpreting science. So by translating, I mean, we're trying to tell people, what does science mean? So you act almost as the translator, just the way that somebody is translating for me today. So people who write about science, communicate about science, they play that same role to help people better understand this language of science. And then the other part is interpreting how science works. So to help people understand, it might seem very confusing to them, all of these technical details. So the science communicator helps explain, how does this process actually work?
អញ្ចឹងបាននេះហើយដែលជាហេតុផលថាហេតុអីបាន science communication ការទំនាក់ទំនងបែបវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងវាមានសារៈសំខាន់ព្រោះយើងអត់យល់ហើយអត់ដឹងមានន័យថាម៉េចអញ្ចឹងតើតែមានអ្នកបកប្រែទីមួយត្រូវព្យាយាមបកប្រែថាវាមានន័យថាម៉េចហើយពន្យល់ថាការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងវាម៉េចអញ្ចឹងបានធ្វើឲ្យមនុស្សចាប់អារម្មណ៍
All right, so this first part we'll be talking about translating the words of science, or what we call jargon. So jargon is a term that refers to the technical words that scientists might use to convey a complex topic. So these might be, sort of scientific words that the average person doesn't understand. So they are very familiar to scientists, but they are unfamiliar to most other people. So that's why they can be a big barrier when it comes to effective science communication. So it's just important to remember that science is its own language that actually needs translating for people who are outside of science. And when it comes to English words, scientific words, a good clue that you might have a jargon word is if the word is longer than 3 syllables. So it's a very long word that is, kind of very complicated and technical.
ជាទូទៅនៅក្នុងpaper របស់ខាងវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគាត់ប្រើពាក្យដែលមានតែគាត់ទេយល់អញ្ចឹងបានគេហៅថា jargon តែដើម្បីធ្វើការ communicate ធ្វើការទំនាក់ទំនងឬក៏បកស្រាយការងារវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងតើតើយើងសម្រួលពាក្យ jargon ហ្នឹងពាក្យដែលបច្ចេកទេសដែលមានតែអ្នកវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រយល់អញ្ចឹងជាទូទៅពេលដែលយើងឃើញពាក្យដែលលើសពី3ពាក្យវាអាចជាតំណាងថាហ្នឹងធ្វើឲ្យយើងចាប់អារម្មណ៍បន្តិចបន្តួចថាវារៀងវែងវាអីចឹងជាទូទៅនៅក្នុង scientific paper អត្ថបទវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគឺរៀងវែងអញ្ចឹងគឺពាក្យគេហៅថា jargon ហ្នឹងហើយ technical word ពាក្យបច្ចេកទេសដែលធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកធម្មតាអត់យល់អញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែព្យាយាមបកស្រាយអាពាក្យ jargon ទាំងអស់ហ្នឹង
So here's some examples of jargon terms from English. And basically the goal of the science communicator is to take these technical words and find a more simple way to say them. So here's some examples, and a lot of these have to do with fish and rivers because that's my background. But for example, we might talk about an animal that is benthic. Benthic just means that it's an animal that lives on the bottom of a river or a lake, as opposed to pelagic, which is a word that we use to describe a fish that lives up in the water, in the open water. So those are, 2 technical terms to convey these topics. They help scientists understand what kind of fish you're talking about. Does it live down at the bottom or does it live up in the water? But for the average person, those words won't mean anything. So you could just describe where the fish lives instead. Another example is scientists will use the word precipitation, which is just a fancy word that is talking about things that fall from the sky. So that could be rainfall or snowfall or hail. And that's an example when I'm talking about syllables. So precipitation is 5 syllables in English. That's a good clue that, okay, this word is kind of long and technical. Another example is substrate. That comes a lot in the field that I study. That's basically just saying what's at the bottom of a body of water. So you could say the river bottom, the riverbed, the rocks, the mud, or the sand. And then another term that you might hear for international fisheries work is transboundary. And all that means is something moving across borders. So these are just some examples of technical words that a scientist might use, and then ways that you might say it a little bit more simply. But the jargon is really going to depend on the field of science that you're trying to learn about, and then also the main language too.
អញ្ចឹងនេះជាឧទាហរណ៍ដែល Erin គាត់លើកឡើងនិយាយពីពាក្យថា technical ចុះពាក្យបច្ចេកទេសឬក៏ jargon ដែលអ្នកវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រគាត់ចូលចិត្តប្រើហ្នឹងព្រោះវាមានន័យដូច benthic ហ្នឹងគឺសត្វដែលនៅក្រោមទឹកហើយ pelagic ហ្នឹងគាត់នៅរៀងលើទឹកអញ្ចឹងពេលដែលអ្នកវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រគាត់ឃើញពាក្យហ្នឹងគាត់ដឹងទីតាំងដែលសត្វនៅហើយតែបើអ្នកធម្មតាដូចយើងយកអត់ខ្វល់ទេឲ្យតែនៅក្នុងទឹកគឺនៅក្នុងទឹកហើយបាច់ទៅកុំអាចថាក្រោមទឹកនៅបាតទន្លេឬក៏រៀងលើ surface ទេអញ្ចឹងវាមិនមែនជាបញ្ហារបស់យើងទេតែបើ scientist គាត់ត្រូវដឹងឲ្យច្បាស់ហើយឧទាហរណ៍ពាក្យមួយដែលPrecipitation ហ្នឹងឃើញវាវែងអញ្ចឹងវាយើងអាច take note យើងអាចកត់សម្គាល់ថារៀងវែងអញ្ចឹងscientist គាត់ចូលចិត្តប្រើវា fancy ផងវាលយប៉ុន្តែស្របពេលតែមួយគឺវាមានន័យសមស្របជាមួយកលៈទេសៈរបស់គាត់ដូចព្រោះគាត់សំដៅទៅលើ Precipitation ហ្នឹងសំដៅទៅលើទឹកដែលធ្លាក់មកពីលើមេឃអញ្ចឹងវាមាន rainfall វាមានទឹកភ្លៀងវាមាន snow មានអីអញ្ចឹងហើយឧទាហរណ៍មួយទៀតដែលយើងអាសាឃើញហ្នឹងជាពិសេសនៅតកតុងនៅទន្លេមេគង្គគឺពាក្យថា transboundary ហើយយើងឃើញមកផ្លែ transboundary ហ្នឹងអត់ដឹងជាអីគេប៉ុន្តែវាមានន័យធម្មតាគឺគ្រាន់តែដែលថាឆ្លងទន្លេព្រោះទន្លេមេគង្គមានប្រទេសជាច្រើនថូកាត់ប្រទេសជាច្រើនអញ្ចឹងវាជា transboundary river អញ្ចឹងណា
Excuse me, I have a question.
Oh yeah.
How can if we don't understand about the jargon term, for example, in the journal article, how can we deal with it? Mostly it happened in the journal article. So scientists try to put many jargon terms in the article. So sometimes we cannot understand about the jargon at there. So how can we do it?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked. And that's exactly what I want to cover on this slide. So what do you do if you can't understand the words? Usually it's if you're reading a scientific paper or sometimes even talking with a scientist, they might use words that you don't understand. So if you're reading a paper and you find a word that you don't understand, one of the first things to do is to look up the definition. So, you can use online, use a dictionary, but it's important to realize though that some words have many meanings. And so it's not, you need to understand the meaning of the word, but you also have to understand the context because people will use a word in a specific field to mean a particular thing. So my other piece of advice is to just try to read more scientific papers on the same topic, because the more you read about the topic, you will get more familiar with the words that scientists use in that field or on that topic, and that will help you understand the context, because some papers will be better about defining their terms than others. And so if you keep reading papers, then you can try to understand, because it might not just be the word itself, but it's the actual concept that they're trying to communicate, that you need some background or some context to understand what that context means. And then the last piece is to ask a scientist. If you are reporting on someone who has published their work and you have access to them, if you're giving an interview with them, you can ask them what certain terms mean, or if you're in university, you can ask your instructors, or you and ask them to explain what this word means and why they're using it or how they're using it. Or if you're reporting on a scientist's work and they say something that you that you don't understand, you can ask them, could you explain that to me in another way? Or could you explain that to me using some different words so that I can understand? And it's a good thing to remember that if you're the one who's the reporter or the journalist or the one who's trying to share the story, and if you don't understand a word, then your readers who are going to read your story probably won't understand that word either. So that role of the science communicator is always to try to ask for clarification and ask them to explain. So yeah, those are just some tips on what you could do if you run into words that you don't understand.
បញ្ញាមានសំណួរមួយតាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងថាតើបើសិនជាយើងអត់យល់ពាក្យ jargon ដែល scientist គាត់ទៅសេហ្នឹងយើងត្រូវធ្វើម៉េចហើយ Erin គាត់បានបកស្រាយមកទី1សំខាន់បំផុតដោយសារវាជាភាសាបរទេសផងគឺយើងគួរតែមើល dictionary ឬក៏មើល definition វាទៅនៅលើ internet អញ្ចឹងណាគាត់ថាពេលខ្លះមើលបទពិសោធន៍ខ្ញុំមើលហើយក៏អត់ទាន់សូវយល់ដែរអញ្ចឹងចំណុចទី2ដែល Erin គាត់លើកឡើងហ្នឹងគឺយើងអាចអានតាក់ទងជាមួយប្រធានបទហ្នឹងរកឯកសារ2 3ថែមទៀតតាក់ទងប្រធានបទហ្នឹងឲ្យអានថែមទៀតអញ្ចឹងកន្លែងខ្លះគាត់គេអាចបញ្យល់នៅក្នុង paper អស់ហ្នឹងហើយទី3គឺយើងអាចសួរគ្រូយើងសួរ scientist ឬក៏អ្នកណាដែលគាត់ធ្វើការពាក់ព័ន្ធជាមួយប្រធានបទហ្នឹងឲ្យគាត់បញ្យល់ជាភាសាសម្រាយអញ្ចឹងត្រូវចាំថាបើសិនជាយើងជាអ្នកកសែតឬក៏យើងជាអ្នកទៅសេសម្រាប់ social media post សម្រាប់បណ្ដាញសង្គមបើយើងមិនយល់ផងយើងទៅសេមិនឲ្យអ្នកដែលអានយល់អញ្ចឹងត្រូវប្រកាសថាយើងយល់នៅក្នុងភាសាសម្រាយរបស់យើង
And one more point is if you are trying to communicate about your own work, work that you are the expert on, it's important to remember that not everyone knows your topic as well as you do. So if you are communicating about work that you have done, then you have to try to remember or think, how can I put this into the most simple terms that other people can also understand?
គាត់លើកទឹកចិត្តឲ្យយើងប្រើ your own word បានន័យថាប្រើភាសាសម្រាយរបស់យើងអញ្ចឹងយើងយល់ថាយើងសរសេរមកអញ្ចឹងកុំព្យាយាមចាំនៅពាក្យអីដែលយើងសូម្បីតែយើងអ្នកសរសេរខ្លួនឯងមិនយល់ផងយើងអាចសរសេរឲ្យអ្នកដែលគាត់អានជា audience របស់យើងនឹងយល់ទេ
All right, so then next I want to talk a bit about how do we show the process of science. So science is a process that includes many parts. Some of those parts are designing a study to help us answer a question about the world. The second part of that process is going out and collecting data or collecting information to try to answer that question. And this collection part is usually the exciting part and the part that is the best one to try to communicate to your audience. And then the third part is trying to take that information or that data that you've gathered and analyzing it to try to understand what does it mean and what is the answer to the question that you were trying to ask. So I should have added the fourth part of that process then is to share what you found with other people, which is communication, and that's what we're talking about today. But when it comes to trying to make science engaging or make it come alive for your audience, I think really honing in on the specific actions that the scientists did to try to answer their questions is what will bring the study to life in the mind of your reader. So you could think about when you're writing a story is you're trying to set up like a little movie in the mind of the readers or in the reader's mind so that they can see, you know, how does this process work step by step, or what did the scientists do? You could think about they're going on a journey with these scientists. And actually, if you use video to explain science, then you know, it's not very exciting to see scientists at their desk, at their computer, just trying to design their study or analyze their data and do a bunch of statistics. the exciting part is to bring people on the journey of how did they actually collect that data? Because usually that means, for environmental science, it means going out into the world and getting information. So in this picture, we have scientists on a boat that they're gearing up with a lot of different types of equipment, and they're going to put that equipment in the water. They're going to collect samples out of the water. They're going to put to get data from these instruments and machines that they put in the water. And so the more you can talk about those concrete specific actions of what they did to try to get the information, the more alive you can make the process of science for your reader.
ចឹងសំណួរសួរថាតើយើងបង្ហាញថាការងារស្រាវជ្រាវវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគឺធ្វើបានបែបណានិយាយពី process របស់វាដំណើរការរបស់វាទី1ជាទូទៅគឺយើងរៀបចំ design study ចាំថាយើងគួរតែធ្វើការងារស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងបែបណាមាន method មានវិធីសាស្ត្រមានអីចឹងទៅហើយទី2ចំណុចទី2ហ្នឹងគឺការប្រមូលទិន្នន័យជាទូទៅការប្រមូលទិន្នន័យហ្នឹងគឺជាកន្លែងដែលយើង excited ដូចទៅ ខេត្តទៅលើទូកទៅអីចឹងសប្បាយចិត្តណាម្នាក់ពេលដែលប្រមូលទិន្នន័យឬក៏ជួបនេះរូបនេះយើងជួបតែទលេហើយនឹងត្រីឯងប៉ុន្តែពេលយើងជួបប្រជាជនអ្នកនេសាទអីចឹងយើងបានព័ត៌មានផ្សេងហើយទី3គឺការវិភាគទិន្នន័យទី4គឺស្អីដែលយើងកំពុងរៀនថ្ងៃហ្នឹងគឺចំណុចទី4គឺការចែកចាយព័ត៌មានដែលយើងទទួលបានពីការវិភាគនឹង communication science communication នឹងប៉ុន្តែបើយើងទៅសេធម្មតាប្រហែលជាអត់មានអ្នកអានប្រហែលជាមានអ្នកមើលទេព្រោះscientific paper ហ្នឹងគឺវា boring ស្រាប់គួរធុញអានអត់យល់ផងអីផងអត់ដឹងគេថាមិនទេអញ្ចឹងបើធ្វើធម្មតានៅមនុស្សអត់ចង់អានទេអញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែរៀបរាប់ដំណើរការ process of science ហ្នឹងធ្វើមិនឲ្យវាដូចយើងមើលរឿងអញ្ចឹង action movie ដូចរឿងកាប់ចាក់អញ្ចឹងមានដំណើរការ1 2 3 4បើសិនជាយើងមានធ្វើវីដេអូក៏ទៅល្អក្នុងរូបនេះក្រុមការងារបង្ហាញច្បាស់ហ្មងគឺគាត់នៅលើទូគាត់រៀបចំសម្ភារៈគាត់បន្ទាប់មកគាត់ដាក់សម្ភារៈគាត់ចូលក្នុងទឹកហើយលើកមកវិញស្រង់ទិន្នន័យហើយបានមកទៅសេអញ្ចឹងវាមានដំណាក់កាលផ្សេងគ្នាបើយើងអាចបង្ហាញអ្នកដែលយើងអាននឹងថាវាមានដំណើរការអីខ្លះធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យពួកគាត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍អញ្ចឹងវាគាត់លែងគាត់អាចទាក់ទាញចំណាយអារម្មណ៍គាត់ហើយគាត់លែងមានអារម្មណ៍ថាធុញនៅក្នុងការអានហ្នឹងឯង
Okay, great. And I just saw we had a question pop up in the chat about how to communicate data if you do not have strong understanding of statistics. That's a very good question, and that's probably one of the most challenging parts of science is trying to interpret what those findings mean. I would say probably the best solution is to look at what the scientists themselves have said about those findings in their paper. And you know, if they don't say it in the paper, then if you have the opportunity, I would ask them to explain what their statistics mean, because they're the ones that that know the best about their results and how to interpret them. Or you could ask someone who is familiar with that field of science to help you interpret it. But it is a good question. And hopefully if they've written the paper well, you should be able to say, they'll report what the results say, but also what they mean, because so that interpretation is one of the most important parts of science. And then, okay, so then this next question is asking about how to make sure all the data that you've collected is relevant to the topic. I'm not sure if that's referring to the scientific process of collecting data. So that's a little bit outside the scope of this training, you know, the data that you collect on, you know, on your field of study. But what we will talk about is from the information that you collect from an interview or about a study, how to understand what's most relevant to communicate to your audience. But we'll get to that in a little bit. So actually, this is a good, yeah. Are there any other questions before we move on? Because next we'll be going into talking about the structure of a scientific study. So
maybe Hans or Perom can just unmute and ask the question directly instead of writing this. Seem to be confusing. Perom ចង់សួរសំណួរហ្មងអត់ព្រោះសំណួរនេះដូចអត់សូវយល់
បាទអត់អីបងឲ្យគាត់ទៅមុខទៀតហ៎បងអត់អីទេ
អូចាអរគុណច្រើនយើងចាំតិចទៀតចាំសួរទៀតក៏បានដែរបើសិនជានៅអត់យល់
អាចបកប្រែបាន
ចា មុននឹងមានសំណួរមួយនៅក្នុង chat box ហ្នឹងគាត់សួរថាចុះបើសិនជាយើងចែកចាយព័ត៌មានយើង communicate តកតងជាមួយនឹង science ហ្នឹងមិនទៅបើសិនជាយើងមិនយល់ពី statistic ដូច graph ដូចអីចឹងណាវារៀងពិបាកយល់មែនប៉ុន្តែErin គាត់ណែនាំឲ្យយើងមើលម្ដងហើយម្ដងទៀតហើយម្យ៉ាងទៀតយើងអាចទៅពិភាក្សាជាមួយអ្នកដែលគាត់ទៅសេបើសិនជាយើងអត់អាចជួបអ្នកដែលគាត់អ្នកនិពន្ធអត្ថបទហ្នឹងហ្មងទេយើងអាចសួរអ្នកដែលគាត់ធ្វើការពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងអាហ្នឹងពេលខ្លះវារៀងពិបាកនឹងយល់ហើយបើសិនជាយើងស្វែងយល់យើងក៏អាច misinterpret យើងអាចមើលហើយយើងច្រឡំថាដូចបើសិនជាគេនិយាយកយើងអាចមើលទៅយល់ឃើញខអញ្ចឹងទៅអញ្ចឹងបើអត់ confident ថាយើងនឹងយល់បើច្បាស់ទេគួរតែរកអ្នកដែលគាត់ជា expert ជាអ្នកជំនាញខាងធនបទហ្នឹង
Okay, so then next we'll talk a little bit about the structure of a scientific study. So if you've ever seen a scientific journal publication, which is how most scientists try to share their work, because so publication in the scientific journal is considered the gold standard for scientists and how they need to share their work. The reason is because in order to get published in a scientific journal, the study has to go through what's called peer review. So that means peers or other scientists have to review the study and critique it. They give feedback and then they suggest whether they think it should be published or not, or whether it needs to be improved. So a study that's in a scientific journal has gone through this process to basically of checking in this scientific field. So when people publish their work, they tend to follow this same structure, and oftentimes scientific or reports or will include some of the same information as well in a similar format. So the first part here is what's called the abstract of a study, or in a report it might be called the executive summary. So if the study is composed of these 4 different sections, then the abstract is like a little miniature version of that study where you might have 1 sentence for each of these sections. And the abstract or executive summary, so again, it's like a mini summary of the whole paper, and it's here where the scientists tell you what they think is the most important thing. I don't know if you want me to do the whole slide, somebody, or we should go bit by bit.
Yeah, you do it right now. ដើម្បីឲ្យចេញជាគេហៅ scientific paper មួយអ្នកនិពន្ធអ្នកជាសាស្ត្រហ្នឹងគាត់ឆ្លងកាត់ការងារជាច្រើនបន្ទាប់ពីសរសេរគាត់ត្រូវគេហៅថា peer review គាត់ត្រូវផ្ញើទៅក្រុមអ្នកស្រាវជ្រាវផ្សេងទៀតដើម្បីឲ្យគេមើលឲ្យគាត់ comment គាត់ feedback ថាវាមិនដែរវាទៅរួចអត់អីចឹងទៅមុននឹងបាន publish អញ្ចឹងមានការងារច្រើនមែនតើដែលត្រូវធ្វើហើយរូប pyramid នេះគឺជា structure នៃ scientific paper អញ្ចឹងទី1ចុងគេដំបូងគេហ្នឹងគេហៅរបៀបគាត់សរសេរគឺត្រូវមាន abstract ឬក៏ executive summary ដែលនៅក្នុង report គេហៅ executive summary ប៉ុន្តែនៅក្នុង paper scientific paper គេហៅថា abstract វាដូចគ្រាន់តែសង្ខេបខ្លីមួយថា paper អត្ថបទហ្នឹងវាមានចំណុចសំខាន់អីខ្លះហើយនិយាយពីអី
So the next section is the introduction, and that gives you the background of what the scientists, of who else has studied this topic. So it gives you the context for the study, and it talks about why the scientists did that study. So they use the introduction to tell you this is why this topic is important and why we decided to study it based on what other people have done. And then the next section is the methods section, and that's where the scientists talk about what they actually did. So this is the action part of the paper, and that's where if you're trying to bring the story to life and talk about how the scientists did this study, then you want to focus on the methods section. Then the results section is talking about what the scientists found or discovered, and that's where they'll talk about if there's anything new that they discovered, or what are the specific details about what they actually found. It's basically, if science is about trying to ask questions, then the results are the answers that they found by asking these questions about how the world works. And then finally, in the discussion section, they talk about why do these findings matter? Why is this study important, and why should we care about this topic as readers?
អញ្ចឹងចំណុចបន្ទាប់និយាយពី introduction សេចក្តីផ្ដើមវាមិនខុសពីសេចក្តីផ្ដើមនៅក្នុងតែសេចក្តីខ្មែរយើងទេប៉ុន្តែនិយាយពី background និយាយពីទិន្នព័ត៌មានតកតងនឹងប្រធានបទដែលយើងសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវនឹងហើយមិនបាន scientist អ្នកស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងគាត់នឹកឃើញទៅធ្វើការងារហ្នឹងហើយមានអ្នកណាខ្លះដែលធ្វើតកតងមកហ្នឹងដែលជាទូទៅគេហៅ literature review ហ្នឹងអូយ៉ាហើយបន្ទាប់មកទី2គឺ method គឺនិយាយពីវិធីសាស្ត្រថាតើscientist គាត់ធ្វើអីខ្លះដើម្បីឆ្លើយតបនឹងសំណួរដែលគាត់ចោទនៅក្នុងវគ្គ introduction អញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើងសរសេរព័ត៌មានកន្លែងហ្នឹងហើយដែលជា action movie ជាសាច់រឿងថាមានដំណើររឿងឲ្យយើងរៀបរាប់ណាហើយទី3និយាយពី result និយាយពីលទ្ធផលអញ្ចឹងបន្ទាប់ពីគាត់ប្រមូលទិន្នន័យបន្ទាប់ពីអីមកគាត់វិភាគហើយគាត់ឃើញអីថ្មីគាត់រកឃើញអីថ្មីលើសពីគាត់រំពឹងទុកឬក៏មិនវិញហើយទី4គឺនិយាយពី discussion ការពិភាក្សាតកតងជាមួយប្រធានបទហ្នឹង reflect ទៅលើលទ្ធផលហើយនិង method របស់គាត់ថាហេតុអីក៏យើងត្រូវមានលទ្ធផលហ្នឹងវាមានន័យថាម៉េចវាសំខាន់បែបណាហើយមិនបានយើងត្រូវខ្វល់ពីការងារហ្នឹងពីលទ្ធផលហ្នឹង
Okay, so if scientists have this structure that we're used to, it's sort of it's something where it's a structure where we get to the point very gradually. So we first talk about all this background information about why it's important, then we talk about what we did, then we talk about what we found, and then at the very end of the paper, it's talking about why the study matters. So this is a very specific structure that scientists are trained to use, but the way that most people process information or the way that most people tell stories or share stories about news or about the world is very different than this. So journalists tend to use a different structure where they flip this around a little bit and they lead with what matters and why. They put that information at the very top of the story because they want their reader to know right away why you should care or why is this important. And then they fill you in with these important details. In English, we call it the 5 W's, but it's who, what, where, when, and why. So those are all of the things that make a news story. And then at the very end is where they talk about sort of the details and the background and the context of the story. So you can see that it's flipped a little bit from how a scientist would communicate.
អញ្ចឹងយើងដូច slide មុនហ្នឹងscientist របៀបគាត់ structure រឿងរបស់គាត់គឺដូច pyramid អញ្ចឹងពីលើដូចហើយធំទៅប៉ុន្តែjournalist អ្នកកាសែតធ្វើឬក៏អ្នកដែលគាត់ទៅសេអត្ថបទនៅលើ social media គាត់ទៅសេបែបផ្សេងពី scientist អញ្ចឹងវាបច្ច្រាស់គេហៅ inverted pyramid ហ្នឹងគាត់យក រឿងដែលសំខាន់ដែលនៅក្នុង discussion របស់ scientist នឹងមកដាក់ពីលើវិញថាហើយឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរថាហេតុអីក៏យើងត្រូវធ្វើការហ្នឹងវាសំខាន់ប៉ុណ្ណាបន្ទាប់មកបានគាត់ឆ្លើយនឹងរៀង important detail មានព័ត៌មានដែលសំខាន់បន្ទាប់ពីឆ្លើយសំណួរថាវាសំខាន់បែបណាហ្នឹងគឺwho what where when why ហ្នឹងឯងហើយបន្ទាប់មកចុងក្រោយបានគាត់ផ្ដល់គេហៅថា background ព័ត៌មានទូទៅតកតងនឹងប្រធានបទហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងវាបច្ច្រាស់ scientist ហើយនឹងអ្នកកសែតហ្នឹងគឺធ្វើរបៀបគាត់ទៅសេគឺបច្ច្រាស់គ្នាទាំងស្រុងហ្មង
So I see a question here in the chat that's saying that so some reports and studies will predict a future scenario of an issue, and so how do you report on that kind of study? So I think something that's important to keep in mind about this type of prediction is to look and see are there any limitations or constraints around the scientist's ability to make that prediction? Or what kind of information is it based off of? Is it based off of complete information or incomplete information? I think scientists would often say there might not be such a thing as complete information because we can never know everything that we need in order to make these predictions. But so it's important, I think, to try to understand what scientists talk about as, they describe it as uncertainty. So there's a certain amount, we can't say 100% that we know that this is going to happen, usually. So it's important to understand how much uncertainty is there around this prediction. And so scientists might have a hard time saying, well, we know this, so they will not probably feel comfortable saying that this will definitely happen for sure. But they might say something like there is a very high likelihood that if things, so I think this comes up a lot when we're talking about climate change. So it's hard to know for sure, but what we are our best understanding or based off of what we've seen happen previously, if things continue in this way, then then these other things are more likely to happen in the future. So I think it's just important to be careful about not being too definitive or absolute when you're talking about a prediction and saying this will absolutely happen because the scientists predict it. But there can be like a very strong likelihood that they think that this will happen. So I think it's all about kind of finding that balance between saying things with certainty, but then also being able to communicate, we have a lot of evidence that suggests that this is what's very likely to happen.
មានសំណួរមួយនៅក្នុង chat box ហ្នឹងគាត់សួរថានៅក្នុង scientific report ហ្នឹងបើសិនជាគាត់ predict គឺដូចសន្មតឬក៏ទស្សន៍ទាយជាទូទៅ paper និយាយពី climate change ដែលគេច្រើនតែធ្វើការ prediction និងការទស្សន៍ទាយហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹង scientist គាត់មានវិធីសាស្ត្ររបស់គាត់នៅក្នុងការទស្សន៍ទាយ predict ហ្នឹងហើយប៉ុន្តែគាត់ជាទូទៅគាត់ក៏ take note ប្រាប់យើងដែរថារឿងហ្នឹងវាអាចនឹងកើតឡើងប្រមាណភាគរយវាមិនប្រកាសថាកើត 100% ទេតែដោយសារតែគេមានអំណះមួយចំនួនអញ្ចឹងវា likely ន័យថាវាលទ្ធភាពដែលវាអាចកើតឡើងហ្នឹងវាមានច្រើនអញ្ចឹងជាអ្នកកសែតឬក៏ជាអ្នកសរសេរព័ត៌មានគួរតែគិតដល់ថាកម្រិតនៃការ likely លទ្ធភាពដែលនឹងអាចកើតឡើងហ្នឹងវាមានប្រមាណភាគរយហើយព្យាយាមប្រាប់ខ្លួនឯងហើយរកព័ត៌មានតទៅអាហ្នឹងជាទូទៅគាត់អាចនិយាយថាវានឹងកើតឡើងឧទាហរណ៍ថានឹងមានចឹងភ្លើងចាស់ព្រៃ 100% វាទៅរួចទេប៉ុន្តែយើងអាចបញ្យល់អ្នកអានរបស់យើងទៅថា likelihood possibility ហ្នឹងវាមានប្រមាណភាគរយហើយមានដំណាំអីខ្លះ
I'd say one other piece of advice is to see how many other scientists agree with this prediction. Because if it's just one scientist saying, I think this is what's going to happen, If you talk to another scientist in the field and they say, do you agree with that prediction based off of this data? And you can see if they say yes or no. So that's something I think with climate change that people are trying to convey, is that there are hundreds or thousands of scientists around the world that are in agreement about the fact that, you know, some of these things that are going to happen if we continue to keep warming the planet. So I think trying to see where the field, if the scientific field is in agreement about those predictions or not, can help you when you're trying to report on them.
ហើយមួយទៀតយើងអាចមើលpaper ផ្សេងទៀតថាតើមាន scientist ណាខ្លះដែលគាត់ agree គាត់យល់ស្របទៅនឹង prediction ហ្នឹងណាមាននិយាយទៅដូច cross check ព័ត៌មានអញ្ចឹងថាមានអ្នកគេនិយាយរឿងហ្នឹងខ្លះយល់ស្របខ្លះអញ្ចឹងអាចឲ្យយើងអ្នកដែលទៅសេព័ត៌មានហ្នឹងទៅសេរៀងច្បាស់ជាងមុនហើយថាមាន scientist ប្រហែលអ្នកប្រហែល100អ្នកគាត់យល់ស្របហើយគាត់ពិតជាគិតថាការងារហ្នឹងវាត្រឹមត្រូវឬក៏ស្អីដែល prediction ហ្នឹងគឺវាអាចនឹងកើតឡើងមែនមិនមានតែម្នាក់ដែលគាត់និយាយអញ្ចឹងណា
Yeah, good question. And I think, you know, these questions are getting at why science communication is its own art, or it's its own field where it is it's a skill to be able to take technical scientific language and communicate it in a way that other people can understand. So, and it's not always easy to do, but it's very important to do. So I appreciate all of you wanting to learn more about how to do this effectively.
អញ្ចឹងបាននេះហើយហេតុផលដែលយើងត្រូវចេះ communicate science ហ្នឹងណាព្រោះវាដូចវាជាជំនាញមួយដាច់ដោយឡែកពីការស្រាវជ្រាវឬក៏ scientific work ផ្សេងអញ្ចឹងព្រោះអត់ស្រួលទេមិនគ្រាន់តែអានហើយដឹងថាសរសេរថាម៉េចយើងត្រូវយល់ត្រូវអីទៀតអញ្ចឹងហើយធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យអ្នកដែលយើងអានអ្នកដែលអានការងារយើងនឹងយល់អញ្ចឹងវាជំនាញដែលយើងគួរតែរៀនអញ្ចឹងថ្ងៃហ្នឹងសង្ឃឹមថាយើងរៀនបានច្រើន
Okay, so basically now to talk more about how journalists they lead with what happened and why it matters. So when we're talking about now the structure of writing a story, in the world of journalism, there's a term called the lead. And this is what we use to call the first sentence or two at the very beginning of your story. This could be considered the most important sentence in your whole story because it's your one chance to really hook the reader's attention. So we all know that people now have very short attention spans and they're flipping through a lot of things and they're kind of scrolling through or scanning through things and they're trying to decide, should I spend time to actually read this whole story or not? So if that first sentence can really grab their attention, then they'll be more likely to continue reading the rest of your story. So this lead could be engaging or colorful or surprising or intriguing, something to kind of make your reader think. But it also shouldn't be too long or complicated. It should get to the point quickly. And it also should be relevant to the main topic or message of your story.
អញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងការសេព័ត៌មានអ្នកដែលធ្លាប់រៀនសារព័ត៌មានគាត់ដឹងហើយឬក៏បើយើងមិនតន់ទេថ្ងៃនេះយើងដឹងហើយថាគេហៅថា lead ជួរទី1ឬក៏ជួរទី1ហើយនិងទី2ហ្នឹងគេអត់ទៅសេលើសពី2ជួរទេហើយ lead ហ្នឹងគឺប្រើសម្រាប់តាក់ទាញចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍អ្នកអានរាល់ថ្ងៃហ្នឹងដើម្បីធ្វើឲ្យគេអានពិបាកណាស់អញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែរៀនទៅសេ lead ហ្នឹងឲ្យវាតាក់ទាញអញ្ចឹងធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យវាតាក់ទាញអញ្ចឹងមួយជួរមានតែមួយជួរឬក៏ពីរជួរហើយមួយទៀតគឺវាមានតំណងមួយអ្នកវា engaging វាធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកអានហ្នឹងគាត់មានអារម្មណ៍ថាគាត់ចូលក្នុងសាច់រឿងហ្នឹងហើយវាexciting ផង surprise ផងវាមើលគ្រាន់អានផ្លែតរៀងភ្ញាក់ផ្អើលផងរៀងចង់ដឹងផងហើយ go to the point បានន័យថានិយាយពីចំណុចដែលតាក់ទងនឹងប្រធានបទហ្នឹងចំហ្មងអត់ដងលើយវែងឆ្ងាយទេ
So here's a couple of examples of what a lead might look like. And oh yeah, I had a question about, so lead, it has a unique spelling for the journalist world, but it has a similar meaning as like to lead to lead a parade or something. But yeah, so the spelling is kind of unique to the world of journalism. So for example, this one story, you could say, so Booth, Bunlam and Kui Kulap live with their 2 daughters and son on a boat, but not on the water. So that kind of sets up something kind of unusual to pick the reader's attention of like, oh, what do you mean they're on a boat, but they're not on the water? It's some sort of, contrast or tension or something kind of surprising or unexpected that might hook their attention. And so this story is about a family who is living on this boat, this fishing boat that is now pulled out of the water. Another example of a lead might be to say, it's surprisingly difficult to find some of the world's biggest fish. That's also, that's a little bit confusing or surprising. If a fish is really big, how can it be hard to find it? And this is a story about using a technique called environmental DNA or eDNA that looks at the genetic material of the fish left behind in the water, because it is actually very hard to find some of the world's biggest fish because they're very rare. So those are just some examples about how you can try to catch your reader's attention at the beginning of a story.
ចឹងនេះជាឧទាហរណ៍ lead ដែល Erin គាត់សរសេរមាន2ហ្នឹងនៅឆ្វេងដៃហ្នឹងខ្ញុំបកប្រែហ្មងទៅបុនឡំហើយនឹងកូឡាបរស់នៅជាមួយកូនស្រី2នាក់ហើយនឹងកូនប្រុសមួយនៅលើទូប៉ុន្តែមិននៅលើទឹកទេអញ្ចឹងឃ្លាមួយហ្នឹងវាគ្រាន់បង្កើតសំណួរថាទូកណាមិននៅលើទឹកអញ្ចឹងវាជា question ឲ្យអ្នកអានគាត់ទៅអានទៅមុខទៀតហើយខាងស្ដាំដៃហ្នឹងគួរឲ្យភ្ញាក់ផ្អើលមែនតើ sorry Erin it's surprisingly difficult ពិបាកមែនតើដែលក្នុងការស្វែងរកត្រីធំជាងគេនៅលើពិភពលោកហើយជាទូទៅវាពិបាកហើយវាមិនមែនរឿងងាយស្រួលទេប៉ុន្តែពេលដែលគេដាក់ពាក្យថា surprisingly ហ្នឹងគឺធ្វើឲ្យយើងឆ្ងល់ថាតែត្រីធំវាពិបាករកហើយមិនបានគាត់ត្រូវ surprise គាត់ភ្ញាក់ផ្អើលធ្វើអីអញ្ចឹងអ្នកអានពេលអាន clear ហ្នឹងហើយគាត់ច្បាស់ជាចង់ទៅមុខទៀតហើយថាមានអីដែល surprise អញ្ចឹងណាហើយការងារខាងស្ដាំហ្នឹងគេធ្វើ eDNA មើលgenetic របស់ត្រីនៅក្នុងទន្លេ
Yeah, so there's a question about resources to guide in writing such leads. I would say the best recommendation I have is to try to read other stories and see which ones grab your attention and see how do other writers start their leads, and then try to analyze what is it about it that made you want to read more of that story.
មានសំណួរក្នុង chat មួយពី Sina គាត់សួរថាមាន guideline មាន structure អីដែលយើងត្រូវធ្វើតាមក្នុងការសរសេរ lead ឲ្យបានល្អហើយ Erin គាត់និយាយថាតាមពិតទៅវាអត់មានអីច្រើនក្រៅពីការដែលយើងអានអត្ថបទឲ្យច្រើនទេហើយយើងសួរខ្លួនឯងមើលថាពេលយើងអានហើយយើងចង់អានទៅមុខទៀតអត់វាតាក់ទាញចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍យើងអត់បើសិនជាមានអត្ថបទណាដែលគេប្រើ lead ពេលយើងអាន clear ទី1 clear ទី2ទៅយើងចេះចង់ទៅមុខទៀតបានន័យថា lead ហ្នឹងគឺវាល្អយើងគួរតែយើងអាចធ្វើតាមឬក៏រៀនធ្វើតាមគេណា
All right, so then the next part of the story that's important is something that we call the nut graph in journalism, and that's because it's sort of in a nutshell or in a small package, all of the most important details of the study in just 1 or 2 sentences. So in this one sentence is where we include those 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, and why. So the who is talking about who is involved in the study, like who did it, who are the scientists. What talks about what did they find or what did they do. Where talks about where the study took place. When is referring to when it happened. And why is talking about why was the study done or why is it important. So as an example from one of the stories from the Wonders of the Mekong project, the nut graph would be scientists from the Wonders of the Mekong project recently undertook an interview study to determine the status of Cambodia's largest fish species based on the knowledge of local fishers. The results suggest severe declines in the size and abundance of all 8 species investigated. So that tells me in 2 sentences pretty much all the key information that I need to know about the study. So the WHO is scientists from Wonders of the Mekong. What did they do? They did an interview study based on the knowledge of local fishers. Where was it? It was in Cambodia. If we were more specific, we would have said in the 3S basin. When did it happen? Well, we say recently, so we don't know exactly when, but we know that it's in the recent past. And then why was the study done? Well, we want to determine the status of the largest fish species. And it's important because they found that these species have all declined in size and number. So that's a way of just kind of summing up the key points of the study very quickly.
ចឹងបន្ទាប់ពីយើងសរសេរ list ហើយយើងគួរតែមាន nut graph ហ្នឹងគឺវាមានតែមួយ clear ឬក៏ពីរ clear ទេដែលឆ្លើយនៅនឹងសំណួរ who what where when ហើយនឹង why ហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងគេប្រើភាសា nut graph ដោយសារតែវាខ្លីហើយវាដូចក្តោបនៅសំណួរជាច្រើនអញ្ចឹងចម្លើយជាច្រើនអញ្ចឹង who សួរថាណាគេនៅក្នុងធ្វើការនៅក្នុងការងារស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងហើយពួកគាត់បានធ្វើអីរកឃើញអីនៅកន្លែងណាតាំងពីពេលណាហើយហេតុអីក៏ធ្វើការងារស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងព្រោះវាសំខាន់បែបណាអញ្ចឹងឧទាហរណ៍មួយនៅក្រោមហ្នឹងscientist នៅគម្រោង Wonder of the Mekong ហ្នឹងថ្មីនេះគាត់ធ្វើការទើបតែធ្វើការសម្ភាសមួយដើម្បីស្វែងយល់ពី status និយាយពីCambodia largest fish និយាយពីត្រីធំដែលមាននៅស្រុកខ្មែរហ្នឹងធំជាងគេនៅស្រុកខ្មែរប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងហ្នឹងហើយការងារហ្នឹងគឺវាអាស្រ័យទៅលើសំណួរ interview គាត់ការសម្ភាសហ្នឹងគឺវាផ្ដោតទៅលើចំណេះដឹងទូទៅរបស់អ្នកនេសាទហើយលទ្ធផលដែលគាត់ទទួលបានហ្នឹងគឺសពបញ្ជាក់ឲ្យឃើញថាមានការធ្លាក់ចុះឡើងខ្លាំងនិយាយពីទំហំត្រីគឺបានថាត្រីវាទូទៅហើយវាស្បូរទេនៅក្នុងចំនួនត្រី8ដែលគាត់ធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងឧទាហរណ៍ example របស់ Erin លើកឡើងហ្នឹងឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរអស់ហ្នឹងឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរ who what where when ហើយនឹង why មកនៅក្នុងតែពីរ sentence នេះ clear
Okay. All right. So now I'll just share here. Oh, yeah, sorry.
One question there in the writing that we write the nut graph.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So the nut graph should be very early on in your story. It could be right after the lead. So the lead hooks their attention about, oh, this is interesting. Why should I read this story? And then the nut graph tells them right away, here's all the key information that you need to know, so that if they only read the first couple sentences of your story, they've gotten most of the information. And if they're still interested, they can keep reading and get more details. So this would be my suggestion of, you don't have to follow this formula exactly, but it's a way that you could structure social media posts to talk about a scientific study and where you would add certain key pieces of information. So if your story is 2 paragraphs, so each of these numbers is 1 sentence or maybe 2 sentences maximum. So the first is your lead. So that's the statement of some kind of problem or surprising fact. Then comes the nut graph that summarizes that who, what, where, when, and why of the study. And then the third sentence talks about either a key result that they found or why is that study important. So, really key important information up high. Then in the second paragraph, you can expand a little bit more. So you can talk a little bit more about what the scientists actually did, a little bit more description about the results and what they found, and then emphasizing again, why does this matter or how will it help? And then usually some kind of action for your reader to take. So it could be read more. So you could have a link to the study, or you could share a link to a longer news story where they can find more information. And then depending on the type of story that you're writing, oftentimes conservation stories might have some kind of call to action that the reader could actually do to address this issue. Or the call to action could be simply please share this post with others so they can learn more about it, and some sort of final message to leave your reader with.
អញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងសំណួរនៅក្នុង chat ដែលសួរថាតើយើងដាក់ nut graph នឹងកន្លែងណាហ្នឹងនេះជាឧទាហរណ៍ example ដែលរៀនគាត់ធ្វើនិយាយពី structure សម្រាប់ social media post តែយើងទៅសេធ្វើម៉េចអញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុង paragraph ទី1ហ្នឹងយើងមាន lead តាមមួយ clear ឬក៏ពីរ clear បន្ទាប់មកទី2មាន nut graph អញ្ចឹង nut graph គឺបន្ទាប់ពី lead ហ្នឹងហ្មងហើយទី3គឺ key result លទ្ធផលដែលអ្នកស្រាវជ្រាវគាត់រកឃើញប៉ុន្តែវាលទ្ធផលហើយយើងអាចសង្ខេបបានបន្តិចមកតបមកនៅក្នុង paragraph ទី2យើងនិយាយ detail យើងបន្ថែមព័ត៌មានថាអ្នកស្រាវជ្រាវគាត់ធ្វើការងារនឹងបែបណាហើយលទ្ធផលនឹងវាមានអីខ្លះទៀតរៀង detail ជាងអាលើបន្តិចទៅហើយតបមកថាតើវាសំខាន់បែបណា how does it matter ហើយ how it will it help វាអាចជួយដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាអីអត់ហើយយើងអាចអានយើងអាចប្រាប់ទៅអ្នកអានថាបើសិនជាគាត់ចង់អានព័ត៌មាននឹងបន្ថែមគាត់អាចរកបាននៅក្នុង link នេះឬក៏ព័ត៌មាននៅក្នុងកាសែតនេះឬក៏អីចឹងទៅហើយចុងក្រោយយើងគួរតែបញ្ចប់នៅគេហៅថា call action ពេលខ្លះយើងគ្រាន់តែអាចនិយាយថា call action ខ្មែរយើងថាម៉េចដូចជាយើងឲ្យពួកគាត់ជួយចែកម្លែកផុសហ្នឹងឬក៏យើងមាន final message យើងមានសារថាការងារអស់ហ្នឹងសំខាន់បែបណាឬក៏ចង់ឲ្យប្រជាជនចូលរួមបែបណាធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យបានន័យថាចំណុចទី8ហ្នឹងគឺធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យអ្នកដែលគាត់អានហ្នឹងគាត់ feel relate ថាគាត់អាចជួយបានអីខ្លះគាត់អាចធ្វើអីខ្លះដើម្បីដូចពាក់ព័ន្ធមួយការងារនឹងឧទាហរណ៍ថានិយាយពីអភិរក្សត្រីធំៗអញ្ចឹងគាត់ធ្វើម៉េចគាត់អាចអត់ទិញត្រីគាត់អាចលេងញ៉ាំត្រីពងឬក៏អីចឹងទៅ
Okay, so one of the main questions people often want to know when you're sharing a story is how do I know, this study is maybe 10, 20 pages long. How do I know what's most important to share about the results in my social media post or my news story? So my biggest hint would be to look at the abstract or look at the executive summary of a study, because that's where the scientists have told you what they think is the most important part of the study. So that's where you can find some of your key findings. But beyond the abstract, some other things that might make the study or a certain result newsworthy, or whether you should put it in your story, would be, is something new or groundbreaking? So is it a new discovery? Is it the first of its kind? Also, is it something that's unusual or unexpected? Is it something that's urgent? So if we're talking about something that's at risk, or if we're talking about a species that might be endangered, those kinds of things are key results or newsy. You could also talk about the extremes, which are interesting. So what's sort of the biggest species that they found, or the smallest species, something at the ends of the spectrum that are interesting in that way. A key result might be something if there's an implication for management or other actions. And then finally, some results that provide a high-level summary or overview of the findings might be something to include in your story. But really, a key result will depend on what your audience cares about. So that's why it's important to really know your audience and what they care about. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later on.
អញ្ចឹងធ្វើមកឲ្យយើងដឹងថា key result នឹងមានអីគេខ្លះលទ្ធផលសំខាន់ដែលយើងគួរតែសរសេរនៅក្នុង social media post យើងហ្នឹងណាអញ្ចឹងទី1ដែល hidden ដែល Erin គាត់រៀបរាប់ហ្នឹងគឺយើងគួរតែមើល abstract ជាចម្បងការងារទី1គឺមើល abstract summary ហ្នឹងហើយបន្ទាប់មកស្វែងយល់ថាវាមានអីថ្មីអត់មានការរបកកំហើញអីណាថ្មីដែលយើងគួរតែទៅប្រាប់ audience របស់យើងហើយបន្ទាប់មកគឺយើងអាចស្វែងយល់ថាព័ត៌មានថាមានអីដែលវាប្លែកវាអត់ unexpected បានន័យថាយើងអត់មានរំពឹងទឹកថារឿងនឹងកើតឡើងអញ្ចឹងណាឬក៏រឿងអីដែល ចិនវាដូចឧទាហរណ៍ថាត្រីនឹងចិត្តផុចពូជហើយអញ្ចឹងយើងត្រូវតែយើងគួរតែ report រឿងហ្នឹងឬក៏លែងមានត្រីហើយឬក៏មិនអញ្ចឹងទៅតបមកយើងមើលទៅលើអីដែល extreme អីដែលធំបំផុតឬក៏ទូចបំផុតហើយមើលថារដ្ឋាភិបាលឬក៏ management ហ្នឹងគាត់បានធ្វើអីខ្លះឬក៏គាត់គួរតែធ្វើអីខ្លះពី implication សម្រាប់អ្នកដែលគាត់ខាងគ្រប់គ្រងឬ policy maker អញ្ចឹងទៅហើយយើងគួរតែ provide high level summary អញ្ចឹងឬក៏ overview ថាយើងគួរតែនិយាយពីទោះជារឿងហ្នឹងវាសង្ខេបមែនប៉ុន្តែគួរតែវាមានកម្រិតមួយដែល high level សំខាន់ហើយវាមាន impact ហើយចុងក្រោយទោះជាសាច់រឿងរបស់យើងហ្នឹងវាសំខាន់ប៉ុណ្ណាយើងរកឃើញ key result ហើយប៉ុន្តែអីដែលសំខាន់ជាងហ្នឹងទៀតគឺរឿងទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងយើង audience យើងគាត់ខ្វល់អត់ប្រិយមិត្តយើងគាត់ចង់បានគាត់ខ្វល់ពីរឿងហ្នឹងអត់អ្នកដែលនឹងអានការងារយើងហ្នឹងណាហើយយើងនឹងនិយាយពី audience នៅវគ្គបន្ទាប់
And I just saw that there was one question about how do you keep your social media posts short? So if you're worried about length, then so this is sort of the structure for like a mini news story that might be 2 paragraphs long. But if you wanted to keep it very short, then I would just focus on this first paragraph here. So something to catch their attention, and then just that nut graph of who, if you were only going to tell them one thing, it would be that who, what, where, when, and why of the study. And then maybe something about why it's important. And I think it's possible to do that in, less than 100 words. And then, so if you have more time and space, then you can expand to these other parts too.
មានសំណួរក្នុង chat មួយដែលគាត់សួរថាអញ្ចឹងយើងធ្វើមិនព្រោះនិយាយពីប្រវែងនៃការសរសេរ ព្រោះនៅក្នុង social media post យើងអាចសរសេររៀងវែងខ្លាំងពេកបានទេអញ្ចឹងErin គាត់ថាបើសិនជាយើងអត់ចង់ឲ្យវាវែងពេកយើងអាចសរសេរតា paragraph ទី1ចំណុចទី1ទី2ទី3ហ្នឹងទៅវាប្រហែលជា100ពាក្យអីហ្នឹងវាល្មមហើយបើសិនជាយើងនៅគិតថា post យើងនៅមាន space សម្រាប់បកស្រាយការងារនឹងទៀតចាំយើងបន្ថែម paragraph ទី2ចំណុចទី4 5 6 7 8ហ្នឹង បើអត់ទេអញ្ចឹងបកមកវិញសរសេរតាចំណុចទី1ទី2ទី3ទៅ
Okay, so now I'll talk through an example story, a social media news post that I wrote about a study on fish tracking that was conducted by Wonders of the Mekong. So this is what the study or the story looked like on Facebook. And but first, I think we'll do just a little poll here to get people's ideas based on what I've shared about what makes a good key result. Oh yeah, thank you for pulling up this poll. So go ahead and say which of these do you think are good key results to share about this particular study. So these are just some different details that were in the abstract, most of them, and are sharing some information about what the scientists found. And I realize that this might be a little bit complicated if you aren't familiar with this type of work. But so basically in an acoustic tagging study, the fish get tags put inside of them, and those tags send out sounds, and those sounds get picked up by listening devices called receivers. And those receivers are put out in a river, and when they detect a fish swimming by, that's how we can study the movement of these different fish species.
ប្រហែលជា poll នេះរៀងពិបាកធ្វើបន្តិចដែលបើសិនជាយើងអត់សូវមានចំណេះដឹងទូទៅតាក់ទងជាមួយការហៅ fish tagging ទី1ពេលដែលយើងចាប់ត្រីបានហ្នឹងយើងត្រូវកັບស្លាកហើយបន្ទាប់មកនៅក្នុងស្លាកហ្នឹងគឺមានដូចជាភាគ A ហើយយើងមានគេហៅ receiver សម្រាប់track ថាត្រីហ្នឹងវាទៅដល់ណាហើយ
All right, so I think we can go ahead and end the poll so we can just take a look at what people are thinking. So this is interesting. So I guess I'm not able to share this poll, but basically I'll tell you what I think is the most newsworthy piece of these findings. So a lot of people thought that these first two were interesting findings. This was talking about tagged fish being detected by one receiver, or the probability of detection. So for me, these are a little bit too technical in the methods of talking about the sort of the logistics of the study and how it was done. For me, I think, for the average person, if they were going to take away one thing from the story, I would want to tell them about what is the farthest distance that a fish moved. Because you remember how I said that talking about the extremes is one way that can kind of catch the reader's attention. So for me, I would say, the longest recorded fish movement was this long. That's because the rest of this is talking about the methods of using this type of equipment, which the average person is probably not going to care about. What I think that they might be more interested to find is, wow, how far did this fish move? The fish could move, over 80 kilometers over the course of the study. So for me, that's what I think would be the most important to share. But again, it really will depend on your audience and what they care about.
ជាទូទៅចំណុចទី1ហើយនិងទី2ហ្នឹងយើងគិតថាអាហ្នឹងហើយជាចម្លើយដែលត្រឹមត្រូវប៉ុន្តែ key finding ដែលយើងគួរតែសរសេរហ្នឹងគឺចំណុចទី4ព្រោះវាបង្ហាញថាត្រីអាចផ្លាស់ទីបានទៅដល់ 88.3 គីឡូម៉ែត្រអញ្ចឹងចំណុចទី1ទី2ហ្នឹងមនុស្សទូទៅអ្នកដែលគាត់អានដែលអត់មានចំណេះដឹងតាក់ទងជាមួយត្រីឬក៏ fish tagging ហ្នឹងគាត់អាចអត់ខ្វល់ប៉ុន្តែពេលដែលគាត់ឃើញថាត្រីផ្លាស់ទីបានឡើង 88 គីឡូអញ្ចឹងវារឿងមួយដែលភ្ញាក់ផ្អើលហើយវា extreme ណា
Okay, so now I'll talk about how I structured this social media post. So the first sentence is telling what the story is about. So it's scientists can use many types of tag technology to track the movements of fish. So it's maybe not the most exciting lead, but at least I'm sharing, here's what the story is going to be about. It's going to be about scientists using a type of technology, and they're interested in studying how fish move.
ចឹងចំណុចទី1នេះនិយាយពី social media post មួយដែល Erin គាត់ធ្វើតាក់ទង fish tagging ហ្នឹងណាគឺ clear ទី1ជា lead ហ្នឹងគាត់និយាយពីថាតើ scientist ហ្នឹងគាត់ scientist ប្រើប្រាស់បច្ចេកទេស tagging គឺការកាប់ស្លាកហ្នឹងដើម្បីមើលចរាចរណ៍របស់ត្រី
Okay, so then the next sentence is where I'm getting at my nut graph. A new study recently published by Wonders of the Mekong scientists shares data from one of the first investigations to track fish using acoustic tags in the Mekong River Basin. So who? That's the Wonders of the Mekong scientists. What did they do? They were tracking fish using acoustic tags. Where? It was in the Mekong River Basin when it was recently. So we could have said, it was, we could have said the year that the study was published, but it was published recently. And then why does it matter? It matters because this is one of the first investigations of its kind. So all that information is in this one sentence.
ចឹង clear ទី2គឺជា nut graph ដែល Erin គាត់សេចឹងឆ្លើយទៅនឹងសំណួរថាអ្នកណាហ្នឹងគឺគម្រោង Wonder of the Mekong ហើយវត្តហ្នឹងគឺគេធ្វើអីគឺគេ take fish ហ្នឹងហើយនៅណានៅ Mekong River Basin កអាងទន្លេ Mekong ហ្នឹងហើយតាំងពេលណាគឺថ្មីហ្នឹងហើយហេតុអីបានគាត់ធ្វើដោយសារថា ហេតុអី why does it matter ហេតុអីក៏វាមានសារៈសំខាន់គឺដោយសារតែការងារហ្នឹងគឺជាការងារទី1ក្នុងការ track បានន័យថាមើលទៅលើចរាចរណ៍ត្រីប្រភេទមួយហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងគឺជាការងារដំបូង
Okay, and then this third sentence is where I'm getting at some of the methods, of what did the scientists do? So it says the tags, which were surgically implemented into 20 fish, send out signals to receivers, which were deployed on floating bamboo rafts in the river to listen for passing fish. So I'm talking about the scientists are deploying these floating rafts. That's what these pictures are showing. Those rafts have these receivers that are listening to the fish. And here I have their study size where they studied 20 fish and they did surgery. They surgically implanted these tags into the fish. So this is where I'm talking about the action of the science and the research.
អញ្ចឹង clear ទី3 Erin គាត់និយាយពី method គឺវិធីសាស្ត្រតើscientist គាត់ធ្វើការងារហ្នឹងបែបណាគាត់ធ្វើរបៀបណាអញ្ចឹងទី1គឺគាត់កັບផ្លាកដោយធ្វើការវះកាត់កັບផ្លាកនឹងទៅក្នុងខ្លួនត្រីចំនួន20ត្រីបន្ទាប់មកផ្លាកហ្នឹងវាមាន signal របស់វាអញ្ចឹងពេលដែលត្រីហើយ receiver ហ្នឹងគឺឧបករណ៍ចាប់សញ្ញាឧបករណ៍ហ្នឹងគឺគេដាក់នៅក្នុងក្បូនអាស័យដែលចោលនៅកន្លែងណាអញ្ចឹងទៅហើយពេលណាដែលត្រីឆ្លងកាត់ឧបករណ៍ហ្នឹងនឹងចាប់យកសញ្ញាថាមានត្រីដែលយើងកាប់ផ្លាកហើយហ្នឹងវាបានឆ្លងកាត់
Unmute. Okay. So next, in the next paragraph is where I'm getting into more details about the results of the study. So this is where I shared the information that I thought was most newsworthy. So I talk about the fastest moving fish was a tagged Walago Atu catfish. So I give the specific details of that species. And then the specific results is that it moved 52 kilometers downstream in 8 hours. And it moved a total of 88 river kilometers over the course of the study. So that was the longest range recorded. So this is again giving this extreme example of the fastest and the farthest fish studied.
នៅក្នុង clear ទី4 គឺ Erin គាត់រៀបរាប់រៀងស៊ីជម្រៅតាក់ទងជាមួយលទ្ធផលដែលទទួលបានអញ្ចឹងគឺគេរកឃើញថាWalago Atu វាជាត្រីសដាយបើខ្ញុំចាំមិនខុសទេ គឺត្រីសដាយចឹងហើយបងសាឡា
មិនថាវាផាក់ផាយនឹងត្រីសដាយប៉ុន្តែមិនត្រីសដាយទេ
ត្រីសដាយអូខេចាអញ្ចឹងរកឃើញថា Walago Atu ហ្នឹងគឺជាត្រីមួយដែលធ្វើចរាចរណ៍បានលឿនជាងគេបំផុតហើយវាឆ្លងកាត់ which move 52 river kilometer downstream អញ្ចឹងឆ្លងកាត់ឡើងគេហៅថា river kilometer ហ្នឹងវាអត់ស្មើនឹងគីឡូម៉ែត្រដែលយើងបោះតាមថ្នល់ជាតិទេឧទាហរណ៍ថាឥឡូវឧទាហរណ៍ថាបកថា52គីឡូម៉ែត្រតាមខ្សែទឹកចុះហើយក្នុងរយៈពេល8ម៉ោងហើយ total គឺវាហាលបាន88គីឡូriver kilometer ហ្នឹងនៅក្នុងរយៈពេលដែលយើងស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងគឺតួលេខហ្នឹងគឺជាតួលេខដែលវែងបំផុតឬក៏រយៈពេលវែងបំផុតដែលយើង record បានតាំងពីយើងចាប់ផ្ដើមធ្វើការងារហ្នឹងមក
So that's just, it's one little detail about the results to kind of get their interest. This next sentence talks about why the study matters. So it provides important preliminary data on the movements of Mekong fish, and it will be built upon by future acoustic tagging studies planned by Wonders of the Mekong. So this is basically saying this study was sort of the first of its kind. So this is sort of early data that we can build on. And also now I'm sharing that the project is planning to do more studies like this in the future. So that's why this particular study is important.
ចឹងclear ទី5យើងបង្ហាញថា why the study matter គឺហេតុអីយើងចាំបាច់ធ្វើការងារស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងវាសំខាន់ប៉ុណ្ណាដោយសារតាវាគឺជាការ preliminary data data ដំបូងដែលមានសារៈសំខាន់សម្រាប់វាស់ទៅលើត្រីដែលធ្វើការចរាចរធ្វើការផ្លាស់ទីនៅទន្លេមេគង្គហើយវាអាចជា study ជាការស្រាវជ្រាវសម្រាប់អ្នកដែលធ្វើបន្តតកតងជាមួយ acoustic taking នៅក្នុងការកាប់ផ្លាកត្រីហ្នឹងដែលគម្រោង Wonder ដ៏មេគង្គចាប់ផ្ដើមអញ្ចឹងអនាគតទៅអ្នកផ្សេងក៏អាចធ្វើតាមការងារនឹងបានដែរ
So this sixth sentence is just saying where they can read more and a link to the full study where it's available at the journal. And then in my last sentence, I have a call to action, which is it's an action that I want the reader to take, which is please share this post to help others learn more about the latest Mekong fish science. And then asking them to follow the wonders of the Mekong. This is a Facebook post, so that they can discover more about the unique Mekong River system and its inhabitants. So the closing message is just to again share that the Mekong River is very unique and because of the interesting fish that live in it, like the ones that are in this study.
អញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងគ្រាទី6ដោយសារតានៅក្នុង social media post យើងអាចទៅសេបានវែងឡាយអីទេអញ្ចឹងអ្នកដែលគាត់អាចទៅមើល link យើង post link ហើយតកតងជាមួយព័ត៌មានលម្អិតឬក៏ study ដែល publish នឹងដែលបោះពុម្ពផ្សាយហើយចំណុចទី7យើងមាន call action មួយ call for action មួយមានគេហៅ closing message មានសារមួយអញ្ចឹង call for action នៅក្នុងសាច់រឿងមួយនេះគឺចង់ឲ្យអ្នកដែលគាត់អានប្រិយមិត្តខា audience ហ្នឹងចែកចាយព័ត៌មានតកតងជាមួយនឹងរឿងត្រីនៅទន្លេមេគង្គហ្នឹងហើយបន្ទាប់មកគាត់អាចshare post ហ្នឹងឲ្យដើម្បីឲ្យមាន follower ផ្សេងទៀតឲ្យអ្នកផ្សេងស្វែងយល់ហើយសារចុងក្រោយគឺនិយាយពីភាពសំខាន់ភាពអស្ចារ្យរបស់ទន្លេមេគង្គ
Great. So I had one more example here about a mollusk study, but since we're getting a little short on time, I think I'll skip over it. But if anyone wants to stay at the end of the training, then I can go through this second example as well, if anyone wants to stay on a little bit longer. So we can cut through to this next. Oh, yeah.
Okay. I just have somebody just asked me the fish name is Treistu.
Oh, Treistu.
Yeah, Treistu.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. It's good that we want to know get our fish species correct. So this next part of the training, we're going to talk a little bit more about messages and how to, because as I mentioned at the end of the story is where you want to leave your audience with some kind of message. But how do you know what kind of message to leave them? So the first thing before you can be thinking about messages is to follow what I think is the #1 rule of communication, and that is to know your audience. That's basically who are you writing or communicating for? And so some things that you might want to know about your audience that can inform how you communicate is how old are they? And by that, I mean, are you talking to school kids or adults? Because those are sort of two different audiences where you would use different types of language in how you communicate. Also, how much do they know about your subject? So are you talking to experts or non-experts? Are you a scientist talking to other scientists who already know your topic? Or are you talking to someone who doesn't know as much about this particular topic? And then also, most importantly, what do they care about? That will really affect the type of message that you want to leave them with. And then another thing is, so what are they expecting? And by that, I mean, what format are you communicating in? So this is just to say that how you would communicate to a government official, if you were, say you were writing a policy brief about a paper, that will be very different than if you're writing a Facebook post or social media post. The type of language that you use, the type of message that you use will be just very different depending on the format and what your audience is expecting to receive in that format.
អញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុងតាមពិត Erin មុនហ្នឹងគាត់មានឧទាហរណ៍មួយទៀតប៉ុន្តែដោយសារតែមកយើងរៀងខើអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាចាប់អារម្មណ៍ចង់រៀនសូត្រពីឧទាហរណ៍ផ្សេងទៀតហ្នឹងអាចចាំដល់ចុងមកអញ្ចឹងគាត់ skip ឧទាហរណ៍មួយហ្នឹងហើយចូលមកដល់ communication rule អញ្ចឹងយើងមានច្បាប់នៅក្នុងការតំណតំណងហ្នឹងទី1គឺយើងត្រូវយល់ច្បាស់ថា audience ប្រិយមិត្តយើងណាគេយើងទៅសេឲ្យអ្នកណាអានគាត់អាយុប្រមាណគាត់ក្មេងគាត់ចាស់គាត់មកពីក្រុមស្ថាប័នណាហើយគាត់យល់ចំណេះដឹងតាក់ទងជាមួយប្រធានបទដែលយើងសរសេរហ្នឹងវាមានកម្រិតណាបើសិនជាយើងគាត់ជា scientist ហើយយើងមិនបាច់បកប្រាស់ពាក្យ jargon ទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងទេព្រោះគាត់យល់ហើយឧទាហរណ៍ណាហើយហេតុអីគាត់ត្រូវខ្វាយខ្វល់យើងមានសារអីសម្រាប់គាត់ហើយរបៀបយើងសរសេរហ្នឹងពួកគាត់រំពឹងថាយើងសរសេរបែបណានិយាយពី format ដែលយើងសរសេរបើសិនជាយើងសរសេរឲ្យ policy maker និយាយពីអ្នកដែលតាក់តែងច្បាប់យើងសរសេររបៀបណាអ្នកដែលជាគ្រូអ្នកដែលជាសិស្សយើងសរសេរបែបណាវាអាចមាន format ខុសគ្នាសម្រាប់ social media post វាបែបណាអញ្ចឹងណា
All right, so why is a study important? It's helpful to leave your readers with some kind of message about your study, especially when we're talking about conservation, or if your study has some sort of implication for actions that your reader could take. So now I'll talk about a tool called the message box that can help you figure out and distill the messages that you want to communicate about a particular topic.
អញ្ចឹងថាតើហេតុអីកិច្ចការស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងវាមានសារៈសំខាន់តាមពិតទៅយើងគួរតែសរសេរអីដែលពេលអ្នកអានរឿងយើងហ្នឹងគាត់ចាំ clear ណាមួយព័ត៌មានណាមួយតើតងការស្រាវជ្រាវឬក៏ឆ្លើយទៅនឹងសំណួរថាតើហេតុអីក៏ការងារអភិរក្សវាសំខាន់អញ្ចឹងហើយបាននៅក្នុង training នេះទៀតយើងទៅដល់គេហៅ message box ហ្នឹងវាជា tool វាជាឧបករណ៍នៅក្នុងដើម្បីជួយសម្រួលយើងនៅក្នុងការធ្វើការទំនាក់ទំនងធ្វើការចែកចាយព័ត៌មានឬក៏សារនឹងឲ្យវាបានល្អ
So the reason why we need a message box or we need messages is because if you give people too much information, they might not remember anything at all. So sometimes scientists take what we call the fire hose approach, where we just give more information. So we give all kinds of facts and data and statistics and more facts because scientists think, oh, it's all important. They need to know everything. But we know that this is not an effective way to communicate because people get overwhelmed and then they don't remember anything. So as a communicator, it's important to figure out what is like the one or two kind of key messages that I really want them to remember, and I'm going to focus on sharing that in my story.
អញ្ចឹងជាទូទៅសម្រាប់ scientist ឲ្យតែរឿងដែលគាត់សរសេររឿងដែលគាត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍ហ្នឹងគឺវាសំខាន់ទាំងអស់ជាពិសេសគឺព្រោះវាជាការពិតដែលគាត់ស្វែងរកឃើញមាន data វាមាន fact វាមាន statistic មាន graph មានតួលេខអីត្រឹមត្រូវវាសំខាន់ទាំងអស់អញ្ចឹងគាត់ច្រើនតែសរសេរមកទាំងអស់អញ្ចឹងប៉ុន្តែសម្រាប់ communicator សម្រាប់អ្នកដែលចែកចាយព័ត៌មាន science ហ្នឹងយើងអត់អាចចេះតែចែកទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងបានដូចក្នុងរូបនេះគឺគេហៅថាដូចបាញ់ទឹកលើភ្លើងហ្នឹងណាគឺបាញ់ឆ្វាយទៅវាចេញមកច្រើនណាវាមានច្រើនពេកដែលអ្នកអានគាត់អាចអត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍ឬក៏គាត់អាចភ្លេច
So this is a tool that's developed by an organization called Compass that's meant to help scientists better communicate about their work. And so it has several different sections that I'll talk through each of them, but they are basically the audience, the issue, the problem, the solutions, the benefits, and then what in English we call so what, which basically means why should we care or why does it matter?
Erin គាត់នឹងណែនាំពី message box មួយដែលក្រុមហ៊ុន Compass នឹងអ្នក develop អ្នកធ្វើតាក់តែងឡើងហើយនៅក្នុងហ្នឹងគឺយើងបើយើងនិយាយពី audience ទី1និយាយពី issue issue នឹងសំដៅទៅលើរង្វង់បញ្ហារឿងរ៉ាវដែលយើងចង់សិក្សាស្វែងយល់នឹងបន្ទាប់មកគឺ problem ថាតើវាមានបញ្ហាអីខ្លះចំណោទបញ្ហាមានរឿងអីដែលយើងត្រូវដោះស្រាយហើយទី2benefit ថាវាផ្ដល់អត្ថប្រយោជន៍អីខ្លះហើយទី3គឺ solution ថាយើងធ្វើអីខ្លះដើម្បីដោះស្រាយចំណោទបញ្ហារឿងរ៉ាវទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងហើយ so what គឺថៃមកវាមានសារៈសំខាន់អីខ្លះធ្វើទៅដើម្បីអីចឹងណា
Okay, and so the way you might use this tool is, and we'll share this box, this layout with all of you after the training, but you could print out this box and then try to fill in information for each of these to try to help organize your messages. And the key, one of the things you'll notice is that there's not a lot of space for each issue or for each topic. And the point is to try to help you make your message be very short and to the point.
ពួកយើងនឹងផ្ញើmessage box ហ្នឹងជូនទាំងអស់គ្នាប៉ុន្តែយើងមើលនៅក្នុងប្រអប់មួយហ្នឹងវាមានកន្លែងសរសេរតិចចាអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើង print មកមូលហេតុដែលធ្វើឲ្យមានកន្លែងសរសេរតិចនៅក្រោមអក្សរheadline ទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងគឺដោយសារតែចង់ធ្វើមិនឲ្យសាររបស់យើងហ្នឹងគឺមានវាខ្លីហើយខ្លឹម
So this first part, though, the top part of this box here, the audience, that's maybe the most important part because who your audience is will determine what kind of messages you include in the box itself. So when you're thinking about an audience for your story, you can think about who is affected by this work, who can make changes based off of the results of the study and who actually cares about it. So these are examples of different types of audiences and what they might care about. So for a policymaker, they want to know, does it support their agenda or the priorities that they have for government? And do their constituents or the people that they represent in government, do the people care about this issue? Managers will want to know about things like how much time or money or effort is it going to cost to actually address the problems in this paper, and who else supports this. Scientists will want to know, are the findings of the story, are they groundbreaking or sort of newsworthy? Is it robust, or does that mean is it scientifically sound? And how does it affect their own work? And then NGOs might be thinking about how does this work fit into their own mission and what they care about, and how does it affect their own work?
អញ្ចឹងដើម្បីចាប់ផ្ដើមធ្វើ message box ហ្នឹងយើងត្រូវស្វែងយល់ថា audience យើងអ្នកណាហើយធ្វើម៉េចបានយើងកំណត់ audience យើងបានអញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែសួរថាអ្នកណាដែលមានផលប៉ះពាល់ affected ហ្នឹងហើយអ្នកណាអ្នកអាចធ្វើឲ្យមានការផ្លាស់ប្ដូរហើយអ្នកណាខ្វាយខ្វល់ពីរឿងហ្នឹងឧទាហរណ៍មាន4ដែលនៅក្នុង slide ហ្នឹងគឺទី1 policy maker អ្នកដែលតាក់តែងច្បាប់ឬក៏អ្នកតាមក្រសួងហ្នឹងថាយើងគួរតែឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរថាតើmessage ហ្នឹងគឺវាចូលទៅក្នុង priority ដូចស្អីដែលគាត់ចាប់អារម្មណ៍ស្អីដែលគាត់ផ្ដល់អត្ថភាពឬក៏អត់ហើយអ្នកនៅក្រោមប្រកបឬក៏ប្រជាជនខ្វាយខ្វល់ពីរឿងហ្នឹងអត់ហើយចំពោះ scientist គឺគាត់ខ្វល់ថាតើព័ត៌មានហ្នឹងវាថ្មីអត់វាជាស្អីដែលយើងរកឃើញថ្មីប្លែកហើយវាប៉ះពាល់នឹងការងារគាត់ឬអត់តាក់ទងគ្នាឬអត់ហើយ manager គឺអាចថាគាត់ខ្វាយខ្វល់តែរឿងថាការងារហ្នឹងគឺចំណាយពេលប្រមាណចំណាយលុយប្រមាណហើយមានកម្លាំងប្រមាណត្រូវធ្វើហើយមានអ្នកណាខ្លះចូលរួមអញ្ចឹងទៅហើយ NGO គឺគាត់មើលឲ្យថាmessage ឬក៏ការងារហ្នឹងវាចូលទៅក្នុង mission នៅក្នុងរបស់អង្គការគាត់អត់ហើយវាប៉ះពាល់ការងារគាត់អត់
Some other types of audiences might be the media. So if you're a scientist trying to communicate to journalists, media will care about, is this newsworthy? Will it sell? And is it a good story? donors, if you're trying to communicate to donors, will want to know how does this work fit in with their mission and their giving portfolio. And then the average person or citizens will care about things that affect them. So how does this affect health or safety or livelihoods or natural resources that they depend on?
ចឹងសម្រាប់ media គាត់ខ្វាយខ្វល់ថាព័ត៌មាននឹងវាថ្មីអត់គាត់អាចយកព័ត៌មាននឹងទៅចុះផ្សាយបានអត់ជាឬសាច់រឿងដែលគេហៅថាសាច់រឿងល្អមួយ good story ឬក៏អត់តែ donor វិញគាត់មើលទៅថាគាត់មើលថាវាសមស្របជាមួយ mission ឬក៏អីដែលគាត់កំពុងតែធ្វើអត់ទេហើយបើ citizen មនុស្សទូទៅប្រជាជនទូទៅគាត់ច្បាស់ជាខ្វាយខ្វល់ហើយថាតើវាពាក់ព័ន្ធប៉ះពាល់នឹងសុវត្ថិភាពនិងសុខភាពការរស់នៅឬក៏ធនធានធម្មជាតិដែលនៅជុំវិញខ្លួនគាត់នឹងឬក៏អត់
Okay, so the next part of the message box is the issue. That's what you put in the middle of the box. It's basically in a few words, what is the big picture or the context? So this could be a few keywords that could be used to, search for this topic online. So, it's in a few words, what is this study about? So it could be something like connecting wildlife corridors or preventing extinction of a certain species like the giant ibis. Or the example that I'm going to talk about is conservation of the Julian's golden carp, of a particular fish, Probarbis. I'm not sure what the Khmer word for this fish is, but that's the issue that I'll be talking about in my example.
អញ្ចឹងដើម្បីកំណត់ការរង្វង់បញ្ហា issue របស់យើងហ្នឹងវាគួរតែជាពាក្យ2 3ពាក្យទេវាមិនបាច់ចាំវែងឆ្ងាយអីច្រើនទេអញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែមើល big picture មើលរូបរាងអាចថាមើលពីចម្ងាយថាបញ្ហាធំគឺជាបញ្ហាអីហើយយើងអាចប្រើពាក្យសំខាន់ស្វែងរកនៅ online បានអញ្ចឹងណាហើយនេះឧទាហរណ៍ដែល Erin គាត់លើកឡើងហ្នឹងមាន3ហ្នឹង connecting wildlife corridor គឺជាប់តំណងជាមួយនឹងអញ្ចឹងខ្លីៗឯងមាន3ចំណុចហ្នឹងសរសេរខ្លីៗសម្រាប់ issue ទី1ហ្នឹងគឺការជាប់តំណងទៅនឹងសត្វព្រៃហើយទី2គឺ preventing extinction ការពារកុំឲ្យមានស្អីមួយឧទាហរណ៍ថាgiant ibis ត្រយងយក្សហ្នឹងកុំឲ្យវាផុតពូជអីអញ្ចឹងទៅហើយទី3គឺការពារការបង្កើតឡើងគេហៅថាគេបង conservation តំបន់អភិរក្សត្រីតសក់ពូជត្រីតសក់ដែលជាត្រីជិតផុតពូជ
Okay, so first one of the parts of the box is to identify the problem that the research is addressing or the problem that a project is addressing. So what is the specific aspect of this big issue that this study focuses on? And so there are many problems that face, this is from an endangered species workshop, but there's many problems just in the conservation world in general. So we want to try to focus on the one that's most relevant to the study or to the project that you're describing. And so in this example, the problem would be that the Julian's golden carp, the fish that I showed, it's being harvested by fishers at its spawning ground in northern Laos before it can lay its eggs. So it's basically being harvested before it can reproduce.
អញ្ចឹងដល់វគ្គយើងកំណត់problem គឺចំណត់បញ្ហាថាចាំពិតមិញយើងមាន issue យើងកំណត់ថា issue នឹងហើយតែនេះយើង zoom in បានយើងចូលឲ្យវារៀងស៊ីជម្រៅតិចថារឿងហ្នឹងវាអីឲ្យប្រកបអញ្ចឹងវាមានបញ្ហាអីពាក់ព័ន្ធអញ្ចឹងណាហើយឧទាហរណ៍ក្នុងនេះគឺនៅឡាវហ្នឹងអ្នកនេសាទគាត់ទៅនេសាទត្រីតសក់ពូត្រីតសក់ហ្នឹងពេលដែលវានៅនឹងកន្លែងវាពងកូនហ្មងអញ្ចឹងគ្នាអត់ទាន់បានពងឬក៏បញ្ចេញកូនមកផងនេសាទគ្នាបាត់ហើយហ្នឹងហើយជាចំណោទបញ្ហា
All right, yeah, sorry, my slides jump around a little bit. So then the next part is identifying the solutions. So this could be what are you doing in the study specifically to address the problem, or what can the audience do to address the problem? And then you want to make sure that the solution is something that kind of matches the problem on the same scale. So if we say that that this fish is going extinct, that's a very large problem, and it's hard to know, well, what would be an actual solution to that? We need to define a more specific problem. So the problem is that they're being harvested before they can reproduce. And so in this case, the solution that we're proposing is a fish conservation zone, or a freshwater protected area that prohibits fishing on the spawning ground of this fish. So basically create a refuge for them that will allow them to reproduce.
អញ្ចឹងនេះបន្ទាប់ពីយើង identify problem យើងហើយយើងដល់វគ្គយើងស្វែងយល់ពី solution ដំណោះស្រាយថាតើយើងធ្វើអីខ្លះឬក៏កំពុងធ្វើអីខ្លះដើម្បីដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាហ្នឹងហើយ audience របស់យើងប្រិយមិត្តរបស់យើងហ្នឹងគាត់អាចដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាហ្នឹងតាមរយៈអីខ្លះគាត់អាចធ្វើបានអីខ្លះហើយ scale និយាយពីទំហំនៃបញ្ហាថាវាធំប៉ុណ្ណាព្រោះមិនរឿងដែលយើងលើកឡើងការការពារត្រីហ្នឹងគឺវាធំព្រោះត្រីចិត្តពុជគាត់និយាយថាត្រីចិត្តពុជពូជមួយវារឿងហ្នឹងវាមានការងារច្រើនដែលត្រូវធ្វើអញ្ចឹងមនុស្សម្នាក់ស្ថាប័ននានាមានដំណោះស្រាយរៀងៗខ្លួនគឺការចូលរួមផ្សេងៗគ្នាឧទាហរណ៍ Erin គាត់លើកឡើងអញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែបង្កើតគេហៅ community fish refuge ហ្នឹងហើយprohibit គឺកុំឲ្យហាមឃាត់កុំឲ្យមានការនេសាទត្រីត្រសក់ហ្នឹងនៅពេលដែលឬក៏នៅអាកន្លែងដែលវាកំពុងពងកូនហ្នឹងហ្មងអញ្ចឹងគឺជាច្បាប់មួយដែលចេញមកណា
All right, so then the next part of the box is thinking about the benefits. And this is where we want to be communicating something positive. So what is the positive outcome for this audience of taking action to address the solution? To address the problem and to implement the solutions. So who does this solution help and how? And then you could be thinking about benefits in the short term and the long term. So some examples of benefits to these fish conservation zones or trying to protect this fish is, if we can sustain populations of this fish, it will protect them for future generations to be able to catch them in the future. Also, these protected areas, the fish conservation zone, can help increase populations of other fish species that might be important for food security. So that's one of the ways that they could benefit the community by having this protected area.
ដល់វគ្គយើងកំណត់ពី benefit ថាតើវាមានលទ្ធផលpositive outcome ហ្នឹងលទ្ធផលវិជ្ជមានអីខ្លះដែល audience គាត់អាចធ្វើបានហើយអ្នកណាអាចចូលរួមជួយតាមរយៈអីហើយមាន short term long term មានថវិការយៈពេលខ្លីរយៈពេលវែងអីខ្លះអញ្ចឹងឧទាហរណ៍ដែលគាត់លើកឡើងគឺយើងអាចរក្សាចំនួនត្រីហ្នឹងសម្រាប់ next generation បានន័យថាអ្នកជំនាន់ក្រោយហើយបន្ទាប់មកចំនួនត្រីបើសិនជាយើងមាន fish conservation zone ហ្នឹងគឺយើងអាចធ្វើឲ្យត្រីហ្នឹងមានកំណើនត្រីប្រភេទហ្នឹងហើយវាពេលដែលត្រីហ្នឹងកើនវាមានសារៈសំខាន់សម្រាប់ food security បានន័យថាមានសន្តិសុខស្បៀងគឺត្រីច្រើនមានត្រីញ៉ាំគ្រប់គ្រាន់អញ្ចឹងណា
Okay, and then finally, this could be the most important part of your message box is thinking about, so what, or why does it matter? Why should the audience care about this? So one of the ways is thinking, how does this work relate to them? Or what is the most important thing that you want them to understand? It could also be what's sort of new or groundbreaking about the work. So in this example, I'd say some of these so what things are that this fish is economically valuable to communities, so that's one reason we should care. But from a conservation standpoint, it's iconic because it can be one of the largest freshwater fishes in the Mekong River, and it's also critically endangered. So it's a species of high conservation value, and that's why we want to try to protect it.
ចឹងពេលដែលយើងកំណត់យើង identify so what នឹងថាតើហេតុអីក៏វាមានសារៈសំខាន់ហ្នឹងយើងគួរទៅសួរឆ្លើយទៅនឹងសំណួរថា audience ហ្នឹងគាត់ត្រូវហេតុអីក៏គាត់ត្រូវខ្វល់ហេតុអីក៏វាមានសារៈសំខាន់ហើយវាមានអីថ្មីអត់អញ្ចឹងឧទាហរណ៍ដែលគាត់លើកឡើងហ្នឹងទី1គឺត្រីហ្នឹងមានតម្លៃខ្ពស់ហើយទីគឺហ្នឹងសម្រាប់អ្នកធ្វើការងារអភិរក្សវាមានសារៈសំខាន់ដោយសារតែវាជាត្រីប្រភេទធំទឹកសាបមួយនៅទន្លេមេគង្គ
Okay, so here's what the box would look like if you put it all together. So I should have said from the beginning that I have sort of a general audience in mind, or sort of citizens of a community. And so here the issue of trying to set up these fish conservation zones for this fish. The problem is that they're being harvested at their spawning ground before they can lay their eggs. The solution is that we want to set up this fish conservation zone to help protect them. The benefits of why we should do this is because it protects them for future generations, and then it can also increase other fish that are important for food security. And then the so what, why do we care? Well, this is an economically valuable species, and it's also an iconic and endangered species. So we had a question come in about what do you do when you're trying to communicate to a mixed audience? And that's where I'd say it's really then it's a judgment call to you as the communicator to decide which of the messages do you think will have the broadest reach across multiple audiences. Or it could be, what is it that matters most to you as a communicator or to the organization that you're trying to communicate for? What is it that they think is the most important thing for people to take home? So for example, if I had to choose between one of these so what messages, I'd say that for some people, they will care about the fact that this fish is economically valuable. But to me, I think the broader, more universal message is that the reason we should care about this fish is that it's very endangered, and it's a very unique fish from a biodiversity standpoint. And that's why we should care. So again, you can include maybe multiple messages in your story if you want to try to cover your bases. Or you can try to pick the ones that you think will appeal to the most people. And so you could be thinking, and I usually tend to default to, for our Wonders of the Mekong work. It's like, so how does this matter to people as a citizen of Cambodia, whether they're in government, whether they are a fisher, whether they are a student. Everybody, who lives in this country, depends on natural resources in some way, or the fact that, certain fish are iconic to the country as a whole. How does the Mekong River affect the country as a whole? We kind of have to think in those more general terms when we're trying to think about communicating to a general audience. But the more you can identify who your audience is and what they care about, then the more specific and targeted your messages can be.
នេះជា message box ដែលយើងស្រង់ព័ត៌មានដែលយើងលើកឡើងនៅ slide មុនអញ្ចឹងយើងដាក់ទៅយើងអាចឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរបានទាំងអស់ហើយ problem benefit solution so what យើងបានទាំងអស់ហើយនៅក្នុង chat មានអ្នកចូលរួមគាត់សួរនៅសំណួរមួយថាតើធ្វើម៉េចបានបើសិនជាយើងត្រូវ identify audience យើងត្រូវកំណត់ថាអ្នកណាជាប្រិយមិត្តរបស់យើងធ្វើម៉េចទៅ ព្រោះមនុស្សវាមានច្រើនណាស់ហើយបើសិនជាយើងចង់សរសេរតាមមួយរឿង identify ថាអ្នកដែល audience របស់យើងនឹងមានច្រើនបែបច្រើនយ៉ាងទៅធ្វើមិនអញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែសួរនៅសំណួរឡើងវិញថាអ្នកភាគច្រើនជាអ្នកណាអ្នក audience របស់យើងនឹងបានន័យថា majority ជាទូទៅអ្នកណាអ្នកជាប្រិយមិត្តហើយមួយទៀត យើងក៏សួរខ្លួនឯងថាចំណុចណាជាចំណុចសំខាន់ដែលយើងចង់ចែកចាយព័ត៌មានហ្នឹងទៅកាន់ audience របស់យើងហើយវាមាន impact វាមានផលប៉ះពាល់ផលអីខ្លះអញ្ចឹងទាំងnegative ហើយ positive impact អញ្ចឹង Erin គាត់លើកឧទាហរណ៍មួយថានៅក្នុងចំណុចថាអញ្ចឹងអីដែលសំខាន់នៅក្នុង message box មួយដែលយើងចង់ឲ្យអ្នកaudience គាត់ចាំហ្នឹងគឺកន្លែង so what ហ្នឹងហើយថាវាមិនមានហេតុអីក៏វាសំខាន់ទី1គឺត្រីហ្នឹងមានតម្លៃខ្ពស់ហើយទី2គឺត្រីហ្នឹងមានសារៈសំខាន់នៅក្នុងការងារស្រាវជ្រាវដោយសារត្រីហ្នឹងចិត្តផុតពូជហើយវាមានទំហំធំខ្លាំងនៅក្នុងទន្លេមេគង្គអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាឲ្យគាត់រើសគាត់ច្បាស់ជារើសយកចំណុចទី2ហើយគឺត្រីហ្នឹងវាមានសារៈសំខាន់ដើម្បី communicate ទៅ audience គឺដោយសារត្រីហ្នឹងវាមានសារៈសំខាន់នៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាព្រោះវាចិត្តផុតពូជហើយវាមានទំហំធំខ្លាំងនៅក្នុងទន្លេមេគង្គអញ្ចឹងយើងបកមកវិញដោយសារ audience យើងមានច្រើនយើងគួរតែសួរខ្លួនយើងថា audience ទាំងអស់ស្អីដែលសំខាន់សម្រាប់ audience បើសិនជាយើងសរសេរសម្រាប់ប្រជាជនកម្ពុជាយើងអាចថាបាច់ខ្វល់ថាពួកគាត់មកពីស្ថាប័នណាទេតែដូចជារឿងត្រីធំឧទាហរណ៍ថាត្រីកូរ៉េអញ្ចឹងវាជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិអញ្ចឹងជនទោះជាគាត់មកពីស្ថាប័នណាគាត់មានតួនាទីណាក៏គាត់ត្រូវតែខ្វល់រឿងតាក់ទងមួយត្រីតំណាងជាតិនឹងដែរ
Okay, so I'm just wondering, does anyone have any other questions before we move on to the next section of our breakout group? Okay, so we're going to, if you have other questions, you can type them into the chat. And in this next part of the training, we're going to join 4 different breakout rooms to practice communicating or coming up with messages that we think would be good for specific audiences. So each breakout room will be addressing a different audience. And we'll be talking about this case study. So it's also fish again, but that's sort of my frame of reference and the Wonders of the Mekong project. But this will be talking about trying to communicate giant barb conservation. So just as a little bit of background, the giant barb is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, and it's the national fish of Cambodia. So these fish are culturally important, and it's thought that releasing them into the wild after you catch them is thought to bring good luck. These fish need healthy rivers to survive because they migrate very long distances. They migrate throughout the whole country of Cambodia from the 3S River Basin along the Mekong River to the Tonle Sap Lake. So that's a little bit of background. But the giant barb is also caught and sold for very high prices. And their populations have declined dramatically, and the species is critically endangered. So that's the problem that we're trying to communicate to our audience, that we have that the national symbol of Cambodia is also a critically endangered fish.
អញ្ចឹងបន្ទាប់ពីនេះយើងនឹងមានលំហាត់មួយធ្វើការជុំគ្នានៅក្នុង breakout room ហើយ case study ករណីសិក្សាដែល Erin គាត់លើកឡើងគឺនិយាយពីត្រីកូរ៉េគឺត្រីកូរ៉េគឺជាត្រីដែលទឹកសាបដែលមានទំហំធំបំផុតមួយនៅក្នុងពិភពលោកហើយវាគឺជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិសម្រាប់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងចឹងសំខាន់តាំងពីខាងវប្បធម៌តាំងពីតកតងមួយសង្គមហើយជាទូទៅប្រជាជនយើងជឿថាបើសិនជាយើងបលែងត្រីហ្នឹងគឺវានាំមកនៅសំណាងល្អហើយត្រីទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងត្រូវការទន្លេដែលមានសុខភាពមានលំហូរល្អក្នុងការរស់នៅហើយនឹងធ្វើការផ្លាស់ទីដោយសារតែវាផ្លាស់ទីចុះឡើងរវាងទន្លេ 3S ស3ហ្នឹងសេកុងសេសានស្រែពកហើយតាមដងទន្លេមេគង្គចុះមកបឹងទន្លេសាបប៉ុន្តែបញ្ហាមួយហ្នឹងគឺត្រីកូរ៉េហ្នឹងត្រូវច្រើនតែគេចាប់ហើយយកទៅលក់នៅក្នុងតម្លៃថ្លៃអញ្ចឹងធ្វើឲ្យចំនួនត្រីហ្នឹងធ្លាក់ចុះជាគំហុកនេះជាបញ្ហាហើយត្រីហ្នឹងសប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃហ្នឹងគឺជាត្រីដែលកំពុងរងគ្រោះថ្នាក់ឈានទៅរកការវិនាសផុតពូជ
Okay, so here are just some examples of types of solutions that we might want to implement to try to address the problem of this fish being critically endangered. So the first is that fishers who catch this giant barb in their nets can try to release the fish back into the wild. The second is that we could collect these endangered fish as larvae when they're very small, when they're babies, to rear them in a safe place in captivity until they can grow bigger and have a better chance at survival, and then release them back into the wild. Another solution might be that people could avoid buying this fish in restaurants, and also in general buying fish with eggs, because that means that that fish hasn't been able to reproduce and try to have more offspring to try to increase the population. Another solution might be to try to protect the giant barb by keeping the migration routes clear. By that I mean trying to make sure that these rivers are free flowing, that there aren't obstacles like dams that might block the passage of this fish. And then another solution might be just trying to raise more awareness about the giant barb and the problems that it faces to help more Cambodians connect with and care about their national symbol. These are just some example solutions, but there might be others. And so in these breakout sessions, I'd encourage you, if you have other ideas about solutions that different audiences could take, then please share those also.
ចឹងនេះជាដំណោះស្រាយដែលយើងអាចធ្វើបានទី1គឺយើងបើសិនជាចាប់បានគួរតែលែងត្រីហ្នឹងទៅហើយទី2យើងអាចយកត្រីពេលដែលវានៅពងទូចៗហ្នឹងយកទៅចិញ្ចឹមបន្ទាប់មកលែងវាពេលដែលវាធំឡើងហើយទី3គឺយើងគួរតែកុំទិញត្រីដែលជិតផុតពូជនៅក្នុងតាមភោជនីយដ្ឋាននានាឬក៏កុំទិញត្រីទូទៅដែលមានពងព្រោះពេលដែលវាមានពងពេលដែលយើងទិញពេលវាមានពងហ្នឹងវាអត់ទាន់បានកើតទេហើយពងមួយចង្កោមហ្នឹងគឺមានត្រីរាប់លានហើយទី4យើងអាចការពារត្រីធំដូចជាត្រីគល់រាំងហ្នឹងតាមរយៈព្យាយាមធ្វើម៉េចកុំឲ្យធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យទន្លេហ្នឹងគឺជាទន្លេដែលហូរដោយរលូនអត់មានអីរាំងស្ទប់ឧទាហរណ៍ទំនប់វារីអគ្គិសនីអីចឹងទៅហើយទី5យើងគួរតែព្យាយាមលើកកម្ពស់ការយល់ដឹងថាត្រីហ្នឹងគឺជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិរបស់ប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងចុះហើយទី6គឺជាសំណួរថាតើដំណោះស្រាយវាមានអីផ្សេងទៀតអត់ហើយសំណួរហ្នឹងហើយគឺស្អីដែលយើងត្រូវធ្វើនៅក្នុង breakout room របស់យើង
Okay, so each breakout room is going to focus on a particular audience. So breakout room 1 will be focusing on communicating to government officials, so in Fisheries Administration. The second will be focused on talking to fishers and other community members. The third room will talk about communicating to conservation organizations. And then the fourth will talk about communicating to primary school children.
ចឹងនៅក្នុង breakout room ហ្នឹងមានជា4ក្រុមទី1គឺមន្ត្រីខាងជលផលហើយក្រុមទី2គឺអ្នកនេសាទឬក៏សហគមន៍នេសាទហើយក្រុមទី3គឺអង្គការដែលធ្វើការងារអភិរក្សហើយក្រុមទី4គឺសិស្សបឋមសិក្សាអញ្ចឹង4ក្រុមហ្នឹងគឺជា audience របស់យើង
So in the breakout room, I'd like us to think about, so which of those solutions that I've listed are going to be most relevant to your audience? And are there other ones that might be more relevant to them also? And then together as a group, think about what would be some benefits to the audience of implementing this solution. And then also, why would they care about this issue, or why does it matter to them?
ចឹងនៅក្នុង breakout room មួយគួរតែពិភាក្សាថាទី1និយាយពី solution ថាមានដំណោះស្រាយអីដំណោះស្រាយដែលគាត់លើកឡើងហ្នឹងវាសមរម្យអត់ហើយមានដំណោះស្រាយអីផ្សេងទៀតគួរតែលើកឡើងអត់យើងអាចនឹកឃើញណាហើយទី2និយាយពី benefit ផលប្រយោជន៍ថាបើសិនជានៅក្នុងការអភិរក្សត្រីហ្នឹងវាមានផលប្រយោជន៍អីខ្លះដល់ audience របស់យើងហើយទី3គឺសូវថាហេតុអីក៏ audience របស់យើងនឹងគាត់ត្រូវខ្វល់ពីរឿងហ្នឹងវាមានសារៈសំខាន់ហើយសម្រាប់គាត់អញ្ចឹងណា
So we don't want to spend too much time in the breakout rooms, but try to have just some quick discussion about it. I think we might take about 20 minutes to do this. So if we come back at, I think it's 11:35 in Cambodia, is that the right time? Or Lee King, do you have some guidance for us in that?
Just want to check the number 2 and number 3, the benefit and why it's matter to the audience. Can you clarify them a bit?
Yeah, so the benefit would be, so why is it important? Why do we care about conserving the giant barb? Why does it matter to us that their population is declining, and why does it matter that we want their population to increase? You know, there's many, and the reasons why an audience might care about that particular issue, you know, will depend on what their priorities are and what they care about. The benefit is like, if we do that, if we are able to restore the population of the giant barb, how does that benefit us as Cambodians, or how does that benefit our children in the future? How does that benefit the ecosystem if we're able to bring this species back? Just sort of, what are the positive outcomes of implementing the solution? So you could think of benefit is, what are the positive outcomes? And so what is, you know, why is it important? Why do we care? So they are kind of similar. But the key distinction is that the benefit is always something positive, whereas the so what could be, I mean, maybe we care about it because it's a big, you know, if it was climate change, it would be, well, we care about it because there's a lot of negative impacts on us. And that's, you know, that's why it's pretty serious. So what could be positive or negative, but benefit is always positive.
Yeah, thank you for clarification.
ចំណុចទី3និងទី2ហ្នឹងខុសគ្នាមិនខុសគ្នាខ្លាំងប្រហែលទេប៉ុន្តែយើងគួរតែអាចចាំថាចំណុចទី3និយាយពី so what ហ្នឹងគឺសួរថាវាមានសារៈសំខាន់អីហេតុអីក៏ត្រូវខ្វល់ពីវាដល់ពេលទី2និយាយពី benefit ជាទូទៅគឺមើលទៅលើលទ្ធផលវិជ្ជមានថាបើសិនជាយើងអាចអភិរក្សត្រីហ្នឹងបានវាមានលទ្ធផលវិជ្ជមានអីខ្លះចំពោះកូនចៅជំនាន់ក្រោយសល់ត្រីសល់អីចឹងណា
Yeah, so I'd say for the facilitators, you know, maybe we want to spend about 5 minutes in the group talking about each of those questions. So just, you know, a quick discussion about each one, and then we'll come back and share as a group.
អញ្ចឹងនៅក្នុង breakout room ហ្នឹងយើងមានពេល10នាទី
Okay.
So what time we come back? 11:30?
Yeah, maybe let's say 11:35, just in case we need a few more extra minutes to wrap things up. So yeah, 20 minutes from now.
មានពេល20នាទី
Okay, so I think, is everyone getting an invitation to join a breakout room? All right, so I'll stop my presentation here, and we can all join the rooms. So see you back soon.
Hello, you see, bong anh bà một bạn anh biết sao lại bạn được bong mình lấy cho mấy bạn hello bong chị bạn một tí lúc bong chị bạn sẽ lấy bong đây biết sao đi bong mình lấy nhầm giấy Susday bang mau akhirnya.
Susday.
Susday bang. Bang cuy bak mood akhirnya mana bayi seru je kita start ni topiknya. Hello. Để sao tại khi dân tin chắc cái ta bác mua ở đây mới những anh kia sang đây bán đẹp tây rồi để sao mà mở tới được chuyện buồn vậy chắc bây giờ bác mua ở đây tới hay dân anh kia sang đây bán Hello នៅថៃនេះបងចៃបងនៅថៃលឺបងហ្នឹងយើងអាចភាសានេះបានអញ្ចឹងបងផ្សេងអាចបើសំឡេងអីទេភាសាតែគ្នាតិចដែរសួស្តីបងជួបបងប្អូនគ្នាHello ผมបានអានហើយបានអាន topic ដែលគេផ្ញើឲ្យនៅយើងនិយាយពីត្រីកូរ៉េមែនទេបាទនឹងចំពោះខ្ញុំមានចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍អីចំពោះការអភិរក្សត្រីកូរ៉េហ្នឹងបងសម្ដៅទៅលេងខ្ញុំមែនបងហ្នឹងភាសាផ្សេងបើអត់ដល់ទៅលេងចឹងភាសាពីនេះសិនចាំពុកទឹកអាចជំនួយកាត់បានហ្នឹងភាសាតទៀតបើចំពោះខ្ញុំគឺកំណត់มันខុសពីអ្នកដែលគាត់បានធ្វើការបាត់បង្ហាញគឺសំដៅទៅលើជាប្រភេទត្រីមួយដែលកំពុងតែប្រឈមនឹងហានិភ័យក្នុងការផ្ដាច់ពូជហងហើយជាប្រភេទត្រីមួយដែលបង្ហាញពីអត្តសញ្ញាណនៃជាតិទាំងមូលហងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាហើយក៏ជាប្រភេទត្រីដែលប្រឈមហានិភ័យខ្ពស់នឹងត្រូវបានគេចាប់យកទៅលក់អញ្ចឹងគេអត់ទាន់មានដំណោះស្រាយច្បាស់លាស់ថាក្នុងការទប់ស្កាត់អញ្ចឹងទៅយើងតែសំណួរសួរថាយើងត្រូវធ្វើយ៉ាងណាដើម្បីទប់ស្កាត់វាបាទមានយកទៀតទេបាទចំពោះបងគឺអ្វីដែលបងចង់ឲ្យគេទៅលើត្រីកូរ៉េហ្នឹងជាទៅទៅនឹងការអភិរក្សព្រោះថាបើយើងមើលជាស្វែងឥឡូវគឺការអភិរក្សរបស់យើងគឺនៅមានគណៈមានការកំណត់មួយអញ្ចឹងបើចំពោះបងគាត់ថាអ្វីដែលជួតែបង្កើននៃការអភិរក្សរបស់នេះគឺបន្តបណ្ដាលនៃទឹករបស់ពលរដ្ឋខ្មែរយើងឲ្យលើកចិត្តពួកគាត់ឲ្យចិញ្ចឹមត្រីពងនេះបានច្រើនព្រោះថាបងនិយាយចឹងដោយសារលើកឧទាហរណ៍ដូចជាសត្វផាន់ណានៅចិនសត្វផាន់ណានៅចិនហ្នឹងគឺពីមុនគឺជាប្រភេទសត្វមួយដែលគេចុះបញ្ជីជាសត្វមួយជាផុតពូជប៉ុន្តែដោយសារតែរាជរដ្ឋាភិបាលប្រទេសចិនហ្នឹងហើយនឹងប្រជាជនរបស់គេគឺគេបំផុសនៃការឲ្យចិញ្ចឹមនៅសត្វផាន់ណាហ្នឹងមិនថានៅក្នុងសួនឬក៏ឲ្យតែពេលក្រោយពីការរកឃើញរបស់គេហ្នឹងគឺបណ្ដាគេបណ្ដោះគំនិតឲ្យពលរដ្ឋគឺស្រឡាញ់ទៅលើសត្វហ្នឹងទី1ទី2លើកទឹកចិត្តឲ្យពលរដ្ឋហ្នឹងគឺធ្វើការចិញ្ចឹមទៅលើសត្វហ្នឹងបានច្រើនអញ្ចឹងដល់ពេលរហូតដល់ឥឡូវគឺសត្វផាន់ណាគឺត្រូវបានគេដកចេញពីបញ្ជីសត្វទឹកប្រពូជហើយអាហ្នឹងបងគាត់ថាត្រីកូរ៉េដូចគ្នាដែរអញ្ចឹងត្រីកូរ៉េយើងគួរតែបន្តពលរដ្ឋឲ្យធ្វើការចិញ្ចឹមប្រភេទសត្វត្រីនេះបានច្រើនទី1ហើយទី2គឺបណ្ដុះនៃគំនិតរបស់ក្មេងជំនាន់ក្រោយយុវជនដែលគាត់រៀននៅតាមសាលាហ្នឹងគឺមានថាយើងព្យាយាមបំផុសបានច្រើនទៅទៅនឹងអត្ថប្រយោជន៍សារៈសំខាន់នៃសត្វត្រីកូរ៉េហ្នឹងដើម្បីឲ្យកូនក្មេងដែលគាត់រៀនជំនាន់ក្រោយហ្នឹងបានយល់បានច្រើនហើយទី3មួយទៀតគឺយើងគួរតែមានការកំសាន្តដោយបែបទេសចរដើម្បីឲ្យសិក្សាស្វែងយល់អំពីសត្វត្រីកូរ៉េហ្នឹងនេះគឺជាគំនិតមួយដែលគឺស្តីងទៅនឹងអ្វីដែលគេបានឲ្យខាងលើដែរនេះគឺជាគំនិតរបស់បងចុះបងផ្សេងទៀតមានយោបល់ដែរអាចយើងអាចពិសានេះបានបងបញ្ញាបងរតនាប៉ុន្តែបងក្រុមយើងទី3ហ្នឹងគឺការសរសេរទៅកាន់ conservative organization ទៅលើ organization ដែលយើងគួរ
convince គាត់បែបណាឲ្យចូលរួមក្នុងការធ្វើការងារហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹង
ថប់ទី2ឬក៏ទី3បង
ទី3បងទី3
ប៉ុន្តែនៅក្នុងនេះខ្ញុំឆ្ងាយបងនេះថប់ទី2ទេជឿ
ឈុំធីមនេះក៏ធីមនេះទី3ទី2បង
នៅក្នុងលីកដែលគេផ្ញើមកគឺទាំងឈ្មោះអនឡាញនេះគឺដូចជានៅក្នុងថប់ទី2ទេនេះគ្រប់ទីអនឡាញនេះអត់មាននៅក្នុងថប់ទី2ប៉ុន្តែមើលរួមតែរួមទី3ទេប៉ុន្តែដល់ពេលបងคลิกដល់រួមទី2នេះវាចេញមករួមទី3វិញអត់យល់
អត់អីបងអត់អីតាមនឹងហ្មងអត់អីតាមនឹងហ្មង
អត់ចឹងនឹងវាស្នាតាមនឹងហ្មងទៅចឹងព្រោះសារបងคลิกអារួមទី2វាចេញមករួមទី3ដែរអត់យល់
ចឹងរួមនេះរួមទី2តើទៅនឹង community member and fisherman បាទបងខ្ញុំផ្ដោតទៅលើខាង organization
ខេណាអីយើងអាចសាកមែលតាមនេះទេ
បាទអរគុណ
មានបងណាផ្សេងមានយោបល់ផ្សេងតាមទៀត
បើខ្ញុំវិញអត់ដឹងថាខ្ញុំចូលរួមណាបងខ្ញុំឡើងវល់វិញ
អត់ខ្ញុំវល់ខ្ញុំអត់មិនហ៊ាននិយាយដែរមិនថានៅរួមណាប៉ុន្តែដល់ពេលមើលទៅលីសឈ្មោះដែលគេផ្ញើមកឲ្យមកហ្នឹងគឺខ្ញុំនៅរួមទី2ទេប៉ុន្តែដល់ពេលខ្ញុំคลิกរួមទី2ខ្ញុំបែរជាមើលខាងនេះឃើញចេញរួមទី3វិញអញ្ចឹងអត់យល់ប៉ុន្តែ
ខ្ញុំចូលខ្ញុំ
ប៉ុន្តែបើតាមមើលទៅដូចជារូបមើលលីសឈ្មោះទៅឃើញដូចបងរតនាគឺគាត់នៅរួមទី2ច្រើនអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំគិតថាប្រហែលជារួមទី2ទៅហើយ
មិនដឹងខ្ញុំចូលរៀងយឺតតិចបងចំពោះរួមទី1រហូតដល់រួមទីប៉ុន្មានដែលគេតែនិយាយអំពីអីគេខ្លះបង
ប៉ុន្តែ topic មួយទេប៉ុន្តែគិតថាគេមានបែងចែកថាខាង Precipitation ឬក៏ពលរដ្ឋធម្មតានៅរួមមួយ
ហើយខ្ញុំចង់ចូលអាខាងរបៀបថាមានកំណត់ដែលផ្ដល់យោបល់ទៅខាងអភិរក្សទៅលើសត្វហើយដល់ពេលសត្វត្រីអញ្ចឹងទៅដល់ពេលហើយខ្ញុំអត់ដឹងថាខ្ញុំចូលរួមណាមិនហ្នឹងខ្ញុំចូលរួមទី4និយាយពាក់ព័ន្ធជាមួយនឹងបំផុសឲ្យកូនក្មេងអូនទុយនឹងឲ្យគាត់ចូលរួមគាត់យល់ដឹងអំពីអាការសត្វត្រីអភិរក្សសត្វត្រីដល់ពេលហើយខ្ញុំមិនក៏ទៅចូលរួមអញ្ចឹងវិញ
ក៏ប៉ុន្តែនេះ topic តែមួយបើយើងនិយាយទៅវាអាចថាវានៅតែមួយណាប៉ុន្តែគាត់តែគេបែងចែកពីប្រភេទរបស់មួយថាលិចជលផលនោះគាត់មានរួមពីមិនទៅមិនដល់ពេលរួមទី2គេដែលផ្ញើលីងនៅក្នុងនេះមកមានរំខានបងប្អូនមើល
អត់អីបងព្រោះចិត្តដល់ម៉ោងដែរអញ្ចឹងយើងភាសាក្នុងរូបហ្នឹងនៅហ្មងទៅ
នឹងចូលចិត្តដល់ម៉ោងដែរឡាយបងចូលរួមរកឃើញ
បងគិតថាតើតើអត្ថប្រយោជន៍ដែល community ពួកគាត់ជាប្រជាពលរដ្ឋបានចូលរួមសហការហ្នឹងតើពួកគាត់អាចទទួលបានអត្ថប្រយោជន៍អីដែរបង
ការចូលរួមទៅនឹងការអភិរក្ស
ត្រីកូរ៉ាំង
នេះ
បាទ
ក៏ប៉ុន្តែមានផលប្រយោជន៍រឿងច្រើនដែរពីព្រោះបងគិតថាបើសិនតែកាត់ធ្វើការអភិរក្សនៅពេលណាដែលការអភិរក្សនោះមានចំនួនការតែអញ្ចឹងយើងអាចទទួលផលពីបានផលពីការចិញ្ចឹមឧទាហរណ៍លើកក្នុងករណីមួយការចិញ្ចឹមប្រភពកំណត់ឲ្យពលរដ្ឋក្នុងការចិញ្ចឹមត្រីណាអញ្ចឹងក៏ប៉ុន្តែយើងអាចថានៅពេលណាយើងចិញ្ចឹមបានច្រើនបបោក្នុងសហគមន៍របស់យើងហើយអានោះក៏យើងអាចយកមកទទួលផលបានដែរន័យថាវាធ្វើយើងធ្វើយ៉ាងម៉េចដើម្បីឲ្យត្រីនោះវាមានចរាចរណ៍ដូចជាត្រីផ្សេងៗបានត្រីមិនដែរទេអីបើសិនយើងអភិរក្សបានច្រើនវិញនេះគឺគណិតបង
ចុះបងត្រីពោរាំងពីច្រើនវាពងនៅតំបន់ណាបង
វានៅមុនទឹកសាបដូចគ្នាតា
ទឹកសាបតែគាត់ថាវាមានប្លុកវាទៅត្រូវពង
ប្លុកដូចឆ្នាំនេះទេដូចជាខាងវាគ្មិនគេបាត់អត្ថបទថានៅដូចជាស្ទឹងត្រែងចាស់អីតំបន់នេះវានៅចន្លោះទន្លេមេគង្គយើងណាបឹងទន្លេសាបអីហ្នឹងគឺសម្បូរច្រើន របៀបថាបើសិនអានេះវាគាត់ទៅជាយោបល់ខ្ញុំវាថាយើងចូលរួមជាមួយនឹងប្រជាពលរដ្ឋយើងឲ្យវាថាអាហ្នឹងវា relate ជាមួយនឹងអាការអភិរក្សនោះហើយអញ្ចឹងវាថាយើងគ្រប់គ្រងឲ្យប្រជាពលរដ្ឋយើងនិយាយទៅយើងដើរតួជា scientist យើងត្រូវវាថាឆ្នៃអ្វីដែលវាថាដូចជាប្រដាប់កន្លែងស្តុកពងសុបនិមិត្តមួយនៅខាងនៅក្រោមបាតទឹកហ្នឹងទៅដើម្បីឲ្យត្រីទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងដើម្បីវាថានៅពេលដែលវាមកពងកន្លែងហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងទៅចឹងទៅយើងឲ្យប្រជាពលរដ្ឋដែលនៅក្នុងតំបន់ហ្នឹងឲ្យគាត់ជួយអភិរក្សនៅកន្លែងហ្នឹងក៏បានដែរអញ្ចឹងណាបងគណិតនេះល្អតែនៅពេលដែលអូនឯងនិយាយនេះនឹកឃើញដូចជានៅអ៊ីតាលីហ្នឹងគេមានកន្លែងស្តុកដើម្បីឲ្យត្រីពងដូចជាប្រភេទត្រីអីគេដែលពងវាថ្លៃជាងគេខ្ញុំស្គាល់តែខ្ញុំភ្លេចឈ្មោះខ្ញុំភ្លេចឈ្មោះដែរអត់ទៅពងវាទៅយកថ្លៃ$10,000ហ្នឹងហើយគេញ៉ាំមួយស៊ុបស៊ីអានោះគេនឹងដែរអានោះមិនថាគេមានសហគមន៍គេមួយទៅគេបង្កើតថាឲ្យគេប្រើឲ្យមានអាងក្នុងសហគមន៍ហ្នឹងគាត់ឲ្យត្រីអាចចូលរំលឹកពងបានព្រោះថាដល់ពេលដែលទឹកឡើងមកគឺព្រោះបើនៅខ្មែរយើងវាមានបញ្ហាទៅនឹងអាបឡារបស់អបឡាពីមុនយើងមិនមានដើមឈើគួររៀងទៅវាត្រីពងបានច្រើនប៉ុន្តែឥឡូវវាស្អាតវាមានបញ្ហាជាមួយនឹងហៅគេបឡាវៀតណាមវាស្អាតតែបឡានោះគឺត្រីវាអាចពងទៅនៅពងបានទេអានោះក៏វាជាបញ្ហាមួយឧបសគ្គសម្រាប់ត្រីដែរយ៉ាបងយ៉ានិយាយទៅបងតែយើងមានវិធីច្រើនបន្តដល់នេះវិញគឺល្អដែរហ្នឹងគឺយើងប្រើដោយ scientific ហ្នឹងគឺអាចប្រើមកដល់បច្ចេកទេសគឺដើម្បីជួយបានច្រើនមែនប៉ុន្តែបើនៅខ្មែរយើងឥឡូវវាមានបញ្ហាបន្តិចដែរទៅនឹងការបន្លាស់ទីរបស់សត្វត្រីដោយសារតែយើងមានអាងទឹកច្រើនអត់ច្រឡំមានអាងទឹកអាគិសនីអាអ្នកកន្លែងវិរិយអគិសនីច្រឡំហ្នឹងហើយវិរិយអគិសនីទៀតចាហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងវាហើយបើយើងនៅវិសាលភាពនៃបន្ទលេមេគង្គរបស់យើងវាដូចជារៀងរាក់ជាងមុនហើយរៀងតូចជាងមុននិយាយទៅបងរៀងពិបាកដែរពាក់ព័ន្ធជាមួយនឹងបញ្ហាទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងសូម្បីតែខ្ញុំក៏ជា science ដែរបងតែគាត់ថាខ្ញុំសិក្សាទៅលើពពួកទឹកប្រៃដូចនៅខាងកពតនៅខាងអីចឹងទៅដល់ពេលហើយពីច្រើនតើមានណាខាងប្រជាជនយើងដែលគាត់បំពោលទឹកនៅក្នុងហ្នឹងបាត់និយាយទៅvariety មួយចំនួនត្រូវបាត់ដោយសារតែពួកគាត់ពីច្រើនកពតពីច្រើនគេចូលទៅ oyster បងចឹងទៅអាទឹកនៅពេលដែលយើងចូលទៅ oyster យើងទឹកវាតែងតែធ្វើឲ្យល្អក់ឬក៏ស្អុយអីចឹងអា variety ដែលយើងវាដុះនៅខាងបាតសមុទ្រហ្នឹងវាធ្វើឲ្យមានបញ្ហាទឹកអស់ហ្នឹងដែរបងហ្នឹងហើយជាចំណុចសំខាន់មួយដែលយើងត្រូវយល់ដែរបើបងនិយាយតាមថាអ្វីសំខាន់គឺយើងត្រូវតែប្រកបនៅពលរដ្ឋតាមយល់តាមច្រើនហ្នឹងហើយសំខាន់ព្រោះនៅក្នុងសហគមន៍មួយឬក៏សង្គមមួយបើសិនតែពលរដ្ឋខ្វះនៅចំណេះដឹងគឺជាបញ្ហារបស់ប្រទេសជាតិហ្នឹងហើយបងហ្នឹងហើយយើងអាចធ្វើវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលឲ្យពួកគាត់យើងជួយគាត់តែឲ្យគាត់ថា how important it is
All right, I think we're getting everyone back now. Hopefully you had some good discussion. Maybe we can start with breakout room 1. So facilitator, would you like to share a little bit about what you talked about? Oh, you can unmute.
So we share screen. Okay, so we don't get enough chance to get everyone to speak, but so from what we got from the session, so the solution that we would like to propose is number 4 and number 5 from what we have written. And in addition to that, we have we need another the four other solution include. One is it could be a destination or subject for a topic to attract tourism for conservation and economic development. Second one is to encourage government to have the rule to set where they can catch the fish and how big the fish can be caught. Even now it's been banned. And also promote about when is the spawning season for the fish, and also how to recognize the fish when they are small, because some fishermen may not know. And also having a issue recommend kind of awarding certificate to those who catch and release the fish back to the river. And for the benefit, there are one for the fishery administration. If they do the solution we propose above, they will be acting as a role model where their, institutional capacity, they can actually deliver the government policy, so that serve the people. So that's what government as a whole want to see. So their credit will be increased, organizational credit. And so why fishery administration would care about that? If they don't do this job properly, there could be a reform or a change in structure managing the organization. So that is the reason. Okay.
Great, thank you for sharing that. And I love that there's lots of good solutions that everyone was suggesting. And yeah, I think that those are all good reasons to care. Others might be that they are the group that's in charge of managing the fish. So it does, it's a reflection on them in a way of, can we manage this fish sustainably? And I would say, one, if we're able to increase the population of this endangered fish, then other fish species might benefit also, and which would be a benefit to the fisheries administration. They probably want to see healthy fish populations overall. So yeah, great suggestions, everyone. Group 2, would you like to share next?
Translation.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah, please. Some you want to sum.
Yeah, I'm looking at group 1 breakout room right now.
Some cat.
Okay. Jump scroll ក៏បានដែរតាមពិតក្រុមទី1គាត់ audience របស់គាត់គឺជាមន្ត្រីរដ្ឋបាលជលផលឬខាងរដ្ឋាភិបាលអញ្ចឹងគាត់យល់ស្របទៅនឹង solution ទី4ហើយនិងទី5តែគាត់ក៏បានលើកឡើង solution មួយចំនួនទៀតដែរគឺលើកឡើងតទៅមួយវិស័យទេសចរធ្វើមកយកត្រីគល់រាំងហ្នឹងជាគោលក្នុងការតាក់ទាញអ្នកទេសចរឲ្យគាត់មកមើលឬក៏អីចឹងទៅដោយសារតែត្រីហ្នឹងគឺជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិយើងហើយបច្ចុប្បន្នហ្នឹងច្បាប់អត់ទាន់អនុញ្ញាតឲ្យចាប់ត្រីហ្នឹងទេគឺបើសិនយើងចាប់ត្រីហ្នឹងគឺមានទោសប៉ុន្តែក្រមទី1ចង់លើកទឹកចិត្តឲ្យមានការកំណត់ទំហំប្រវែងនិងទីតាំងដែលអាចចាប់បានហើយចំណុចទី3គឺគួរតែផ្សព្វផ្សាយពីរដូវពងកូនតែរឿងហ្នឹងgovernment ក៏រដ្ឋាភិបាលក៏បានធ្វើហើយក៏កំពុងនឹងធ្វើដែរគឺពេលដែលរដូវពងកូនយើងអាចនេសាទត្រីបានលក្ខណៈ commercial បានទេហើយអ្នកនេសាទមួយចំនួនគាត់ក៏មើលអត់ស្គាល់ថាត្រីហ្នឹងពេលនៅទូចវារូបរាងព្រោះវានៅតែច្រឡំជាមួយត្រីផ្សេងអញ្ចឹងគាត់អាចចាប់ខុសអញ្ចឹងគួរតែបរិញ្ញាអ្នកនេសាទឲ្យគាត់ស្គាល់ថាពេលវានៅទូចវាមានរូបរាងមិនខ្មិចហើយដើម្បីពួកគាត់ប្រឡែងទៅអញ្ចឹងណាពេលដែលចាប់បានហើយមួយទៀត solution មួយទៀតគឺបង្កើតជាលិខិតសារសម្រាប់អ្នកដែលគាត់ចាប់បានឲ្យដោះលែងដូចករណីErin លើកឡើងនៅក្នុងរូបពូមួយដែលគាត់ចាប់បានត្រីឲ្យគាត់លេងហ្នឹងយើងគួរតែធ្វើម៉េចលើកទឹកចិត្តគាត់ឲ្យថ្ងៃក្រោយគាត់បើសិនជាគាត់ចាប់បានគាត់គួរតែប្រឡែងទៀតហើយចំពោះ benefit វិញអត្ថប្រយោជន៍និយាយពីសមត្ថភាពហើយមុខមាត់របស់ស្ថាប័នថាយើងធ្វើម៉េចអាចដឹកនាំកូននយោបាយហ្នឹងហើយធ្វើជាគំរូសម្រាប់ដល់អតីតបានហើយម្យ៉ាងទៀតដោយសារត្រីហ្នឹងជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិគឺបើសិនជាប្រជាជនចូលរួមទាំងអស់គ្នាវាជាប្រយោជន៍រួមវាមិនមែនធ្វើដើម្បីណាគេម្នាក់ស្ថាប័នណាមួយទេហើយយើងក៏អាចគៀកោ mobilize ធនធានផ្សេងពីអង្គការស្ថាប័នពាក់ព័ន្ធដើម្បីធ្វើការជាមួយរដ្ឋាភិបាលហើយដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាហ្នឹងហើយនឹង so what តើវាមានសារៈសំខាន់បែបណាហេតុអីក៏មនុស្សយើងគួរតែខ្វល់ពីវាហ្នឹងដោយសារតែទូនីតិនៅក្នុងស្ថាប័នជំនាញអញ្ចឹងបើយើងអាចធ្វើបានអាចមានការកែតម្រង់អាចមានការផ្លាស់ប្ដូររចនាបថរចនាសម្ព័ន្ធផ្សេងនៅក្នុងការអភិរក្សត្រីនឹងអស់ហើយតើ
បាទ
Thank you
សូមក្រុមទី2គ្រប់ធូ
unmute
ក្រុមទី2សូមតំណាងក្រុមទី2បងក្រុមទី2អាច
ក្រុមទី2អ្នកចូលរួម
ចាបងហាលីហ៎លោកគ្រូមកពីខាងមន្ទីរមានជ័យ
ខ្ញុំ screen នៅលើទូរស័ព្ទវាតូចអ្នកគ្រូខ្ញុំវារៀងពិបាកដែរ
បងមើលឃើញទេនេះ
បើមិនសិនជាអត់មានទេចាំខ្ញុំនេះក៏បាន
ឥឡូវបងសង្ខេបទៅព្រោះមិញបងចូលរួមទស្សនសាស្ត្រគ្នាពីអីខ្លះបងសង្ខេបអ្វីដែលបានពិភាក្សាគ្នាទៅ
បាទអញ្ចឹងនេះសម្រាប់ខ្ញុំសូមតំណាងឲ្យក្រុម2ដែលយើងជជែកគ្នាទៅលើតកតងជាមួយនឹងដំណោះស្រាយតកតងជាមួយនឹងផលប្រយោជន៍ហើយនឹងអត្ថប្រយោជន៍ហើយនឹងការធ្វើការផ្សេងៗអញ្ចឹងដំបូងហ្នឹងគឺតកតងជាមួយនឹងដំណោះស្រាយក្រុមយើងបានលើកទឹកចិត្តថាអាចថាប្រមូលត្រីឬក៏ត្រីដែលនៅតូចហ្នឹងឬក៏ពងត្រីដែលជិតផុតពូជហ្នឹងយកទៅចិញ្ចឹមសិនដើម្បីអាចឲ្យត្រីហ្នឹងមានលទ្ធភាពរស់បានច្រើនបន្ទាប់មកគឺគាត់យកទៅប្រឡែងវិញបាទហើយទី2គឺយើងនិយាយមួយទៀតគឺមានការលើកទឹកចិត្តអ្នកនេសាទហ្នឹងឲ្យអ្នកនេសាទហ្នឹងដែលនេសាទបានហ្នឹងយកចិញ្ចឹមនៅតំបន់អភិរក្សបានន័យថាយើងគិតថាបើសិនជាអាចគាត់អាចចិញ្ចឹមពពួកត្រីតំបន់ហ្នឹងបន្ថែមទៀតឬក៏បង្កើតជាតំបន់អភិរក្សហ្នឹងដើម្បីជួយពួកត្រីហ្នឹងហើយមួយទៀតតកតងជាមួយនឹងការបង្កើតនៅសហគមន៍ត្រីហើយសហគមន៍ត្រីដែលចង់និយាយថាសហគមន៍ដែលមានស្ថាប័នពាក់ព័ន្ធផ្សេងគ្នាហ្នឹងចូលរួមជួយដើម្បីការពារហើយនឹងរក្សាដំណើរការរបស់សហគមន៍នោះបានល្អប្រសើរនិងមានការរៀបចំជួយបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលដល់សហគមន៍ហើយនឹងប្រជានេសាទឲ្យយល់ដឹងអំពីប្រភេទត្រីហ្នឹងហើយនឹងអត្ថប្រយោជន៍របស់វាហ្នឹងឲ្យបានល្អប្រសើរបាទនេះគឺជាដំណោះស្រាយហើយមានមួយទៀតហ្នឹងតាមមួយទៀតតែទៅសេអត់អស់គឺគាត់ថាមានដូចជានៅពេលដែលចាប់បានអញ្ចឹងអាចថាមានការប្រឡែងត្រឡប់ទៅវិញហើយក៏ដូចជាឬក៏សហគមន៍នឹងមានការដូចជាលក្ខណៈទិញពពួកត្រីពីអ្នកដែល ដែលនេសាទបានហ្នឹងប៉ុន្តែតម្លៃហ្នឹងមិនខ្ពស់ទេអញ្ចឹងដើម្បីថាជាការលើកទឹកចិត្តចូលរួមរបស់សហគមន៍ហើយក៏មានការជួយពួកគាត់ត្រឡប់តិចតួចពេលដែលគាត់យកត្រីហ្នឹងមកឲ្យសហគមន៍ឬក៏លេងចូលទៅក្នុងតំបន់អភិរក្សហ្នឹងវិញបាទនេះគឺជាអ្វីដែលយើងបានជជែកគ្នាហើយអត្ថប្រយោជន៍ហ្នឹងគឺយើងគិតថាបើសិនជាយើងបង្កើតជាតំបន់អភិរក្សឬក៏កំណត់ដែនកំណត់ណាមួយពេលដែលយើងធ្វើការទៅលើពពួកត្រីហ្នឹងគឺយើងអាចបង្កើតជាលក្ខណៈតំបន់ទេសចរទាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងវិស័យខាងផ្នែកត្រីហ្នឹងដែលយើងអាចបង្កើតជាតំបន់ទេសចរហើយគូផ្សំជាមួយនឹងតំបន់ទេសចរហ្នឹងក៏វាបានคล้ายទៅជាកន្លែងមួយដែលជួយទៅដល់អភិរក្សពពួកត្រីដែលជិតផុតពូជហ្នឹងដើម្បីឲ្យវាមានចម្រោកហើយនឹងមានកន្លែងសុវត្ថិភាពហើយអាចថាមានចំណីគ្រប់គ្រាន់ដើម្បីឲ្យវាមានសមត្ថភាពបន្តពូជហើយឬក៏ធំធាត់បន្តទៅទៀតនេះគឺជាអ្វីដែលយើងបានជជែកគ្នាហើយចុងក្រោយបាទចុងក្រោយហ្នឹងគឺយើងអាចបង្ហាញពីអ្វីដែលជាសារៈសំខាន់បន្ថែមទៀតទៅដល់អ្នកដែលនៅក្នុងសហគមន៍ឬក៏ប្រជាជនជាពិសេសឬក៏ជាសារបន្ថែមទៀតយើងចង់បង្ហាញថាពពួកត្រីហ្នឹងគឺជាត្រីដែលកម្របាទវាជាប្រភេទត្រីកម្រហើយវាជិតផុតពូជទៀតហើយក៏ជាត្រីមួយដែលតំណាងជាតិរបស់យើងហើយក៏ជាត្រីមួយដែលជាត្រីដែលកម្រប្រភេទត្រីទឹកសាបដែលកម្រនៅក្នុងពិភពលោកផងដែរនេះគឺជាសារបន្ថែមទៀតហើយអ្វីដែលយើងបានពិភាក្សាបាទអញ្ចឹងឯសារពេលវេលាខ្លីហើយក្រុមរបស់យើងចម្រុះហើយក៏យើងក៏មិនបានស៊ីជម្រៅប៉ុន្តែនេះគឺជាអ្វីដែលបានមកពីការពិភាក្សារបស់ក្រុមបាទអរគុណ
ច្រើនបងអាចសាមឌីជួយសង្ខេបភាសាអង់គ្លេសឲ្យ Erin តិចទៅ
Group 2 solution is collect fish larva, raise it in captivity and then release it back to the wild. And second point is introduce them to conservation zone, organize conservation zone, community fisheries to take care of the fish, and intensive provide some intensive to fishermen who catch the fish and release it back. And the benefit is they can organize like turn the conservation zone into tourism site. So not only to help the fish to be safe, have enough food and spawning ground, but also contribute to the community in taking care of the zone. And the last stage is the fish is the national iconic. It is rare and endangered fish. That's why you have to conserve it.
Excellent. That's, yeah. Those are all great ideas. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Okay. Oh, group 3, that's me. All right, our group. I did not take, I just took my notes offline, so I'll just share those now, but thanks to everyone who contributed to our discussion. So I think there was a good point that was raised. We were talking about conservation organizations, and there was a question of, is this environmental conservation or social conservation? And so kind of depending on the mission and the ability of the organization, one solution for them might be to rear the endangered larvae in captivity if they have the facilities in order to do like the head starting. But then also we recognize that these groups have the ability to help raise awareness with other people about the giant barb and trying to increase connection to the giant barb. And we realize that some of the other solutions could be the types of messages that these groups could actually be sharing. So an organization group can help raise awareness about fishermen needing to release the fish when they catch them, or raise awareness about people not buying the fish in restaurants or not buying fish with eggs. So those were some of the different solutions that that we discussed that a conservation group could contribute to. And then as far as the benefits, we talked about, well, because this fish is, part of freshwater, and freshwater ecosystems are so important both for people and also for other species. So if we can conserve this species, then other species that a conservation group might care about would also benefit. And also talking about how all these species are interconnected. And so that would be, the benefit of connecting them. And then our group also is, in terms of why we care, mentioned that, you know, that because this is a national symbol of Cambodia, if we lose it, then Cambodia doesn't have its national symbol living in the wild. And so that's why a reason we could care. And also that it fits with the mission of most conservation organizations to conserve what we already have, so that they should, you know, by wanting to protect this fish, that they're helping to meet their own mission as well. And then we talked a little bit about in terms of if we wanted to get more specific about the type of solution, we could talk about the way in which the group could help raise awareness. So maybe it would be using things like posters to raise awareness, or working with school children to help, you know, kind of connect them to their environment. So yeah, those were some of the specifics that we mentioned. Anyone else from group 3 wants to add anything, but that's kind of the main summary.
សម្រាប់ក្រុមទី3ដែលសារតា audience គឺជាអង្គការសង្គមស៊ីវិលធ្វើការតាក់ទងជាមួយការងារអភិរក្សអញ្ចឹងតាម mission របស់គាត់ជាទូទៅគឺអភិរក្សស្រាប់តែអញ្ចឹងហើយដោយសារត្រីហ្នឹងគឺជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិទៀតអញ្ចឹងវាចូលទៅក្នុងការងារ priority ការងារអាទិភាពរបស់គាត់ហើយសម្រាប់ solution វិញគឺគាត់ចង់ប្រមូលពងត្រីហើយចាំនៅក្នុងស្រះបន្តមកលែងតាមក្រោយអញ្ចឹងណាហើយគាត់ក៏ចាប់អារម្មណ៍ទៅលើការ raise awareness ការលើកកម្ពស់ការយល់ដឹងតាមរយៈការដោះលែងត្រីធ្វើឲ្យអ្នកនេសាទគាត់យល់ថាការដោះបើថាចាប់បានអញ្ចឹងគាត់គួរតែដោះលែងហើយអត់គួរទិញត្រីដែលវាមានពងឬក៏ត្រីដែលចិត្តផុចពូជហើយមួយទៀតគឺអាចធ្វើជា poster ចែកចាយទៅសហគមន៍ដើម្បីឲ្យគាត់យល់ដឹងហើយជាពិសេសយើងអាចលើកកម្ពស់ការយល់ដឹងនឹងជាមួយសិស្សសាលាព្រោះសិស្សសាលាតែគាត់រៀនហើយគឺគាត់យកទៅប្រាប់អ្នកផ្ទះគាត់គ្រួសារគាត់ហើយចំពោះ benefit វិញដោយសារតែបើទោះជាអង្គការសង្គមស៊ីវិលខ្លះមិនធ្វើជាមួយត្រីក៏ដោយប៉ុន្តែគាត់ធ្វើជាមួយការងារអភិរក្សហើយការងារទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងគឺវាគេ interconnected វាផ្សារភ្ជាប់គ្នាអញ្ចឹងជាគាត់អាចអភិរក្សត្រីតំណាងជាតិមួយនេះហើយគាត់បានន័យថាគាត់ក៏អាចអភិរក្សធនធានផ្សេងទៀតដែរអញ្ចឹងវាល្អសម្រាប់ ecology ទាំងអស់គ្នាហើយ
Thank you. Okay, and then finally group 4. Let's see, who is facilitator for group 4?
Tilly? Suphatra បងSuphatra ក្រុមទី4សមាជិកក៏បានសមាជិកក្រុមទី4ជ័យមួយម៉ាត់មកក្រុមទី4អៀនអស់ហើយ
ប្រហែលជាបងសុភារតអាច share ក៏បានដែរ
Okay. Thank you for pointing out. Audience របស់យើងគឺក្មេងៗថ្នាក់បឋមអញ្ចឹងយើងគិតថាសាររបស់យើងគួរតែឲ្យរៀងសាមញ្ញឲ្យក្មេងៗបងប្អូនទូចងាយយល់ជជែកបាញ់មិញមានច្រើនដែរតាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងការអប់រំនៅសាលាមានគ្នាយើងលើកឡើងពីជ្រាបបញ្ចូលសាររបស់យើងតាមរយៈការអប់រំពីគ្រូពីឪពុកម្ដាយហើយក្នុងនឹងផងដែរយើងអាចលើកឡើងជាការអប់រំបែបនិទានរឿងខ្លីៗឲ្យពួកគាត់ចូលរួមមាន role play មានអីអញ្ចឹងណាដើម្បីឲ្យគាត់យល់អំពី អំពីថាតើអីទៅជាត្រីកលរាំងមានសារៈសំខាន់អីខ្លះគួរឲ្យស្រឡាញ់មកយើង inspire ហើយយើងឲ្យគាត់យល់ពីសត្វត្រីហ្នឹងហើយសត្វត្រីប្រភេទហ្នឹងហើយគ្នាយើងមានអីបន្ថែមទៀតអីក៏ខ្ញុំនិយាយអត់អស់ទៅព្រោះហ្នឹងចា
ហ្នឹងហើយបងហើយលឺអត់បងហើយតើតើជាមួយនឹងចំណុច solution ហ្នឹងហើយពួកគាត់ក៏បានលើកឡើងតើតើជាមួយនឹងការធ្វើ animation video សម្រាប់ក្មេងៗដែរអញ្ចឹងណាព្រោះគាត់ថាហើយពួកគាត់តូចហើយយើងអត់អាចយកនៅ solution ណាដែលយើងដូចវាធ្ងន់ពេកសម្រាប់គាត់ទេដូចក្មេងៗចូលចិត្តមើលតុក្កតាមើលរឿងអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាយើងធ្វើតាក់ទងជាមួយនឹង animation អញ្ចឹងគឺប្រហែលជាអាចបញ្ជាទៅគាត់បានលឿនជាងហើយពេលខ្លះគាត់អាចមើលវីដេអូនឹងហើយគាត់ទៅប្រាប់គ្រូសាស្ត្ររបស់គាត់ទៀតឬក៏មិត្តភ័ក្តិរបស់គាត់ផ្សេងទៀតហើយចំពោះតាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងbenefit ហើយនឹង so what ហ្នឹងក៏អត់សូវខុសគ្នាពីខាងក្របីទៀតមុនដែរគឺយើងគិតគូរលើដូចជាផ្នែកសេដ្ឋកិច្ចហើយដូចត្រីនឹងជាត្រីតំណាងជាតិអីចឹងដូចក្មេងៗបើសិនជាយើងនិយាយថាត្រីនឹងជាត្រីតំណាងឲ្យជាតិអីចឹងគាត់តែជាដូចប្រោតដូចលយអីចឹងណាសម្រាប់ក្មេងៗហើយដូចបើនិយាយពីសេដ្ឋកិច្ចវិញគាត់ប្រហែលជាអត់សូវយល់ទេតែយើងអាចប្រាប់គាត់ថាហ្នឹងវាអាចនាំលុយឲ្យជួយនាំលុយមកដល់ប្រទេសយើងអីចឹងដូចចូលតែបងអស់ហើយបង
The solution for group 4 the group 4 focus on primary school children so they cannot do anything very intensive or too complicated. So the solution is one is to integrate it into school curriculum by like have some session on storytelling, role play, just to understand what the fish look like, how cute they are, and produce animation movie or video. And we believe that kids, they always, when they learn something, they always spread to their friends and family. And for the benefit, since we can introduce or let them know that this is the national fish, it can create some kind of pride within themselves, like we Cambodian have such big fish. And the fish is very beneficial to economic. It can be an abstract idea, but we can mention that it can bring in some money through some other activity if we have fish life.
Great, thank you so much. That's a good example. And as you said, kids can help raise awareness about a topic. Once they care about it, they can help other people care about it too. So that's a great suggestion. And I think one thing that came out of this discussion for me gets at this earlier question about how can we communicate to diverse audiences. Well, one theme that came up in most of the groups that was important is that this is the national symbol of Cambodia, and that's one reason why we should care. Regardless of who you are, this is something that we can all try to unite on and agree on. So that's one of the reasons why Wonders of the Mekong reinforces that message a lot in our social media. We communicate to a broad audience, and that one is sort of a message that we think will speak to everybody, regardless of who they are.
ក្រុមដែលយើងទាំង4ក្រុមហ្នឹងសិតតែលើកឡើងចំណុចមួយនិយាយពីត្រីតំណាងជាតិអញ្ចឹងបើទោះជា audience យើងគាត់មកពីស្ថាប័នណានៅអាយុប៉ុណ្ណាសូម្បីតែក្មេងសិស្សសាលាទូទៅក៏យល់ដែរថាត្រីតំណាងជាតិវាសំខាន់អញ្ចឹងបានគម្រោង One of the Mekong ហ្នឹងនៅតែលើកសារហ្នឹងម្ដងហើយម្ដងទៀតជារឿយៗថាយើងគួរតែអភិរក្សត្រីដែលវាចិត្តពិតពូជហើយវាតំណាងឲ្យប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងទៀត
Great. So we reached the end of our time scheduled for this training. I just wanted to do a quick recap of what we covered today. So just thank you all for joining, and I hope you found it interesting. I thought that you all asked very good questions, but we talked about basically the process of communicating science, how it is how to translate the language of science, and also how to describe the process of science and the actions to make it more alive and meaningful for your audience. We talked about the basic structure of a scientific study and how scientists communicate differs a little bit from how a journalist might communicate, about how to pull out some of the most important findings in a study. One of the ways is to look at the abstract or the executive summary to see what the scientists themselves have identified as important. We talked about other things that might make a finding newsworthy, whether it's new, whether it's something that's urgent, rare, or endangered, whether it's something that has implications for management, whether it's something that's sort of an extreme, like the biggest or the most of something. And then we talked about how to structure a social media post to try to grab the reader's attention, and also how to communicate the most important parts of the study in a nut graph or a very short, concise sentence that includes, who, what, where, when, and why it happened, or why it's important. And then we talked about how to develop these messages of how do you identify what actually is important. And that will depend on your audience. How knowing your audience is one of the most important rules of communication. And once you know that audience and you know what they care about, you can craft a message that will resonate with them and help them understand why they should care about your story. So that would be sort of my recap of the training in a nutshell.
នេះចង់បញ្ចប់នៃវគ្គបណ្ដុះបណ្ដាលយើងហើយ អរគុណទាំងអស់គ្នាដែលបានចូលរួមតែ Erin គាត់ចង់ recap សង្ខេបថាថ្ងៃហ្នឹងយើងបានរៀនអីខ្លះអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំក៏និយាយសង្ខេបដែរអញ្ចឹងទី1និយាយពី process of science ថា scientific paper ហ្នឹងគេទៅសេបែបណាគេធ្វើបែបណាទី1យើងធ្វើមួយចឹងទៅហើយទី2គឺសម្រាប់អ្នកដែលយើងចង់អ្នកកសែតឬក៏ចង់អ្នកដែលសរសេរព័ត៌មានតាក់ទងជាមួយ science ហ្នឹងយើងគួរតែបកស្រាយបកប្រែ scientific paper ហ្នឹងតាមរយៈអីហើយទី3គឺនិយាយពី structure ថា scientific paper ហើយនឹងអត្ថបទព័ត៌មានដែលអ្នកកសែតគាត់សរសេរហ្នឹងវា structure ខុសគ្នាបែបណាប្រហែលជាចាំមកនិយាយពីរូបពីរ៉ាមីតហើយនឹងសម្រាប់ site គឺពីរ៉ាមីតដាំក្បាលចុះហ្នឹងហើយទី4និយាយពី key result ថាយើងមើលកន្លែងណាដើម្បីដឹងពី key result មើល abstract មើលអីចឹងហើយមួយទៀតនិយាយពី social media post ព្រោះ social media post ខ្ញុំគិតថាយើងចាប់អារម្មណ៍ច្រើនដោយសារតែភាគច្រើនយើងប្រើទាំងអស់គ្នាហើយវាចាំបាច់អញ្ចឹងយើងជាទូទៅសរសេរខ្លីៗទេអញ្ចឹងយើងគួរតែចាំថាទី1វាមាន analytic ហ្នឹងទី2មាន nut graph ដែលឆ្លើយនឹងសំណួរទាំង5ហ្នឹងហើយទី3យើងគ្រាន់តែបញ្ចូល key finding តិចមកអញ្ចឹងបានមក paragraph ដែលយើងអាចផុសបានមិនលើសពី100ពាក្យហើយទី4យើងត្រូវយល់ថា audience យើងណាគេអញ្ចឹងបើយើងដឹងថាប្រិយមិត្តអ្នកដែលតាមដានរឿងយើងហ្នឹងណាគេហើយយើងអាចទៅសេធ្វើម៉េចឲ្យចំចំណុចហ្មងយើងបាច់ចាំបើសិនជាយើង audience យើងជាក្មេងอยู่5ឆ្នាំយើងដឹងហើយតែយើងទៅសេពាក្យបបាក់យើងគាត់អត់អាចយល់ទេអញ្ចឹងមុននឹងទៅសេយើងត្រូវយល់ថាអ្នកណាជា audience របស់យើងដើម្បីយើងផ្ញើសារទៅគឺត្រូវតែប៉ុណ្្នឹងទេអរគុណច្រើន
Thank you. So a few points that are being raised in the chat. One, we would really appreciate it if you could please all take our post-training survey and test. That'll let us know whether this training was effective, and also you can give us some feedback. And then Selah has reminded us that if you would like to now take what you've learned in this training and put it to use, and practice writing your own social media stories about science or about conservation, you can send it to the organizers and we can give you feedback on it, work with you on it, and then hopefully share it on our platform on the Wonders of the Mekong Facebook page. So I encourage you all to reach out to us and do that.
ចឹងយើងមាន post test form មួយដែលមើលឃើញនៅក្នុង chat ហ្នឹងចឹងជួយពេញផងថាថ្ងៃហ្នឹងយើងបានរៀនអីហើយយើងរៀនចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍របស់យើងរៀនចេះអីខ្លះអញ្ចឹងហើយបើសិនជាយើងនៅចាប់អារម្មណ៍ការសរសេរព័ត៌មានហ្នឹងហើយចង់ផ្ញើមកគម្រោងអ្នករៀបចំហើយចង់ practice ចង់អនុវត្តការងារអស់ហ្នឹងអាចសរសេរឲ្យផ្ញើឲ្យពួកយើងនឹងcomment ហើយឆ្លើយតបទៅវិញ
Great, so that's the end of our scheduled time. So if anyone needs to sign off, that's totally fine. I'm happy to stay on for a few more minutes if somebody is willing to stay on a little bit too to answer any additional questions. But this will conclude the formal section of our training, and we hope that you all join us for future trainings. So thank you, everyone. អរគុណទាំងអស់គ្នាម្ដងទៀតហើយដល់ម៉ោងចប់ហើយបើសិនជាទាំងអស់គ្នាចង់ចេញសូមអញ្ជើញតែបើសិនជាមានសំណួរអីបន្ថែមពួកខ្ញុំនៅប្រហែលជា 4-5 នាទីទៀត Great, so we can, anyone who has to leave, that's totally fine. If anyone would like to stay, I just wanted to answer a couple of the other questions that came in. There was one earlier about that had to do with communicating somewhat maybe something that might be controversial and that might go against the mainstream understanding, and how could you communicate that in a way that wouldn't create some backlash for the scientists? So I think that that's a very interesting question. It is a challenge when we're talking about something that might be somewhat political or somewhat controversial. I would say that the safest thing to do is to try to stick to the facts and stick to the evidence that's brought up in the study. So all scientific studies have to collect data and information in order to make their conclusions. And so as long as the data are collected in a scientifically sound way, we can say, what is this data? What are this information? What is that telling us? And that will hopefully be a little bit less controversial. What I think gets more controversial is when people start making some of those predictions, or they start drawing certain conclusions about the data. And that's where you just, want to be careful about, you don't want to overstate things. You want to highlight what's important, but I think, trying to stick to those facts as much as possible is one way to try to deal with a potentially challenging topic or situation.
មុននឹងមានសំណួរនៅក្នុង chat មួយហ្នឹងគាត់សួរថាយើងធ្វើមិនដើម្បី report ទៅសេព័ត៌មានតកតងជាមួយរឿងដែលវាចម្រុងចម្រាស់ឧទាហរណ៍រឿងនយោបាយអីចឹងណាអញ្ចឹងដំណោះស្រាយគឺមានតែយើងពេលដែលយើងសរសេរយើងគួរតែ stick to fact គឺយកព័ត៌មានណាដែលវាជាការពិតព្យាយាមអាន scientific paper ហ្នឹងហើយយកព័ត៌មានដែលវាពិតយកមក report ទៅអញ្ចឹងវាអត់គួរមានបញ្ហាអីទេ
Okay, and then there was one more question about perspectives on the education sector to conserve the endangered species like the giant barb. I don't know, maybe Selah, do you have anything that you might want to share on this? Or YEA, you probably have a better perspective on this than I do, but how do you think the education sector is currently doing in terms of endangered species conservation, or what could they do more?
គុណច្រើនបងតកតងនឹងវិស័យអប់រំយើងដឹងថាយើងឃើញថាបើសិនជាថ្នាក់កម្រិតបឋមអនុឬក៏វិទ្យាល័យគឺខាងរដ្ឋមានបង្កើតជាគម្រោង Eco School ដែលអនុញ្ញាតឲ្យសាលារៀនមួយជ្រាបចំណេះដឹងផ្នែកបរិស្ថានទាំងបរិស្ថានតកតងនឹងអនាម័យតកតងទៅនឹងរឿងជីវៈចម្រុះអីហ្នឹងជំរុញឲ្យសាលាបញ្ចូលកម្មវិធីនៅក្នុងសាលាមួយដែរអញ្ចឹងបើសិនជាបងអាចមើលទៅថាតើក្នុងសាលាឬក្នុងវិទ្យាល័យហ្នឹងអាចយកគោលការណ៍សាលាមេត្រីភាពបរិស្ថានឬក៏ Eco School ហ្នឹងមកអនុវត្តអញ្ចឹងអាចមានបង្កើតជា Eco Club បង្កើតជាអីហ្នឹងអាចដើម្បីឲ្យកូនសិស្សគាត់មានសកម្មភាពស្វែងយល់រៀនសូត្រពីបញ្ហាហ្នឹងបន្ថែមអញ្ចឹងណាបងហើយសម្រាប់ពីគម្រោងឆាយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គពី Eco យុវទូតវិញពួកយើងផ្ដោតសំខាន់ទៅលើ
Okay, Liking Fritz. So I can jump in a little bit.
Sure.
អញ្ចឹងតកតងជាមួយនឹងគម្រោងឆ្លើយតបទៅនឹងសំណួររបស់គាត់វិញខ្ញុំអាចលើកពីឧទាហរណ៍តកតងជាមួយនឹងគម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គដែលយើងព្យាយាមសរសេរជាអត្ថបទ
ដាច់នេះឲ្យចូល Wi-Fi វិញ Don't know why. Hello.
Can you mute yourself please?
Okay. គម្រោងអច្ឆរិយភាពទន្លេមេគង្គព្យាយាមសរសេរអត្ថបទដែលយើងដកស្រង់ចេញពីការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវឧទាហរណ៍ថាប្រភេទត្រីធំធំដែលរងផលប៉ះពាល់ហើយបង្ហាញអំពីប្រភេទត្រីធំធំហ្នឹងជាត្រីដែលធំជាងគេលើពិភពលោកត្រីទឹកសាបធំជាងគេហើយវាកំពុងតែរងគ្រោះផលប៉ះពាល់អីផ្សេងៗហ្នឹងអញ្ចឹងយើងមានបង្កើតទៅជា story ដូចជា Kingfisher យើងប្រម៉ូទយើងលើកទឹកចិត្តឲ្យអ្នកនេសាទហ្នឹងគាត់ព្យាយាមចាប់ត្រីនឹងបានហើយដោះលែងមកវិញអញ្ចឹងយើងធ្វើការទៅសម្ភាសគាត់ទៅចែកជាមួយគាត់ហើយបង្ហាញថាហេតុអីក៏គាត់ចាំបាច់ត្រូវការដោះលែងត្រីនឹងឡើងវិញយើងទៅថតសាច់រឿងរបស់គាត់ហើយប្រម៉ូទតាមរយៈ social media អញ្ចឹងមានអ្នកនេសាទដតីផ្សេងទៀតគាត់ធ្វើតាមដែរអញ្ចឹងវាមានសាច់រឿងជាច្រើនដែលតាមរយៈការធ្វើឲ្យមានបានថាដូចជាវីរៈបរោះលែងត្រីមួយអញ្ចឹងគាត់នឹងធ្វើតាមបន្តគ្នាមិនមែនតែត្រីកូរាំងទេមានរហូតដល់ត្រីរាជយើងទទួលបានត្រីរាជចំនួន5ក្បាលមានប្រភេទកាធាយអាស៊ីដល់ធំជិត40-50 គីឡូក៏ទទួលបានដើម្បីដោះលែងទៅធម្មជាតិវិញថែមពណ៌ហើយដោះលែងទៅធម្មជាតិវិញអញ្ចឹងនេះជាអ្វីដែលយើងព្យាយាមធ្វើការផ្សព្វផ្សាយវាមិនងាយស្រួលប៉ុន្តែយើងនៅតែអាចធ្វើបានចា៎
អរគុណច្រើនបងហើយនិយាយទៅខ្ញុំស្ដាប់បានតទៅនឹងអច្ឆរិយៈមេគង្គហើយនឹងក៏ Eco School ប៉ុន្តែអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំចង់ដឹងបន្ថែមទៀតហ្នឹងគឺវិធីសាស្ត្រនៃការស្រាវជ្រាវហ្នឹងគឺចង់ដឹងថាតើយើងសិក្សារបៀបម៉េចដើម្បីឲ្យដឹងថា species ហ្នឹងគឺជា species endanger ណាជា species ដែលកម្រហើយបើសិនជាយើងដឹងហើយប្រជាជនទូទៅហ្នឹងគេអាចចង់និយាយថា access តទៅនឹងព័ត៌មានហ្នឹងតាមដោយរបៀបណាអញ្ចឹងណាដោយសារតែប្រជាពលរដ្ឋនៅប្រទេសយើងនៅប្រទេសខ្មែរគឺគាត់អត់សូវមាននិយាយថាគាត់មិនសូវមានតែគាត់ពិបាកនឹង access នឹងព័ត៌មានដែលតទៅនឹងត្រីដែលកម្រឬត្រីដែលមានការប្រកួតអីផ្សេងៗហ្នឹងហើយក្នុងនេះយើងជា scientist ហ្នឹងតើយើងគួរតែធ្វើដោយរបៀបណាដើម្បីថាវិភាគឬក៏ analyze បញ្ហាទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងបញ្ជូនទៅដល់អ្នកដែលរស់នៅតាមជនបទឬតាមបណ្ដានៅ countryside ផ្សេងៗហ្នឹងបងអរគុណច្រើនបង
អរគុណច្រើនMartin តាមពិតទៅនៅក្នុងបើសិនជា Martin ធ្លាប់តាមដានគម្រោង Facebook page របស់ Wonder the Mekong អច្ឆរិយទន្លេមេគង្គឬមើលក៏តាមរយៈ Eco យុវទូតហ្នឹងគឺយើងមានបង្កើតជា poster ហ្នឹងបង្ហាញអំពីប្រភេទសត្វដែលកំពុងតែរងគ្រោះចិត្តផុតពូជនៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាយើងមានជាច្រើនប្រភេទមានកាធាយមានប្រភេទត្រីកូរាំងត្រីរាជនឹងហើយមានទំហំប្រមាណហ្នឹងគឺយើងបង្កើតចេញជា poster ហើយក៏យើងមានការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវបែបវិទ្យាសាស្ត្រទៅលើប្រភេទត្រីធំចំនួន8ប្រភេទដែលកំពុងតែរងគ្រោះខ្លាំងនៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាដែរខ្ញុំអាចផ្ញើជា scientific paper ហ្នឹងបើសិនជា Martin អាចចាប់អារម្មណ៍ចង់អាន
បាទបងខ្ញុំពេញចិត្តបាទ
ចាអញ្ចឹងចាំហើយចាំខ្ញុំផ្ញើឯកសារនឹងជូន
អរគុណច្រើនបាទបងអរគុណច្រើន
អូខេ
មានសំណួរ
Okay, thank you. I would like to ask a question to Erin. For example, our team conducted a population survey of the dolphin, and then they have the result of the estimated population. to the conservationists, to the people who work in the area. In this area of expertise would understand what it means when we start say like 89 Meravi dolphins left in the Mekong. But as communicators, we need to actually create the meaning to that specific result, that data, to make it means or matters, like a so what, the answer to a so what questions to our target audience. For example, to the people living in Phnom Penh. What does it mean? The dolphins are in the Mekong River in Krati and Stung Treng. What does it mean to the people living in Phnom Penh, to the kids at school? So who can say that? Who can translate the meaning? Who and how valid to make it to translate the meaning to the target audience? Who should be the valid people, and how do we make the validity of the translation of the meaning of that data? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, and that's one of the big questions we have as communicators is, we can do our best to come up with messages, but we don't always know if those messages actually connect with our audience or not. One way to do that is to try to gather information about your audience. So to survey them, to poll them, to figure out what do they care about, what do they already know about your issue, so how much do you have to educate them, and then what do they, what do they think is important, and then you might be able to see if you run different stories with different messages, which ones are more successful, which ones get shared more, or which one do people talk about more. I think one way to put, when you're talking about a population number, I think the key, whether it's 89, 86, 91, the key is there aren't as many dolphins as there used to be. If we paint the picture of what would a healthy population look like, how much bigger would it have to be for the dolphins to be out of danger? So you can, maybe it's communicating that we are, why we don't want to lose this species. That's really the main message that we want to communicate. And so with each population survey, it lets us know how close or closer are we to losing them or to helping to recover them, and how we're really, every single individual counts in a population that's that small. So I think, somehow trying to convey those things. I think we have Selah has written a story that we'll be sharing, I think, in the next month about the dolphins, that kind of gets at the emotion of what does it mean when you have only one dolphin left. And that's sort of on an emotional level. This made me sad just thinking about it, but how do you communicate that to your audience? So yeah, but I think it's a good question of, only your audience can really tell you if that message landed with them or not. So I think it's important to do some sort of follow-up or outreach if you can, to figure out what did it work? Did it matter? Did it change the way that they think or not? And if not, then you can try to adjust your messages as needed. But it's a good question. I don't know if I have a definitive answer, but that would be one suggestion, I think.
Can add some more discussion here, because it's very interesting, and I myself also have challenges in doing this. For example, if I feel that, or I know that, I find out that the people care more about themselves. For example, if we're talking about losing the dolphin, we're losing the water they will drink, for example. And there's a relation to that, but scientifically it's not yet valid, or it can be very misleading to say so in such a relation. So if I want to make the point by communicating that, my question should be, who should be, if I want to do that, who should be the valid person to make such correlation or can we do it so that people feel more related to the number of population that is declining, because when the population is declining, it means the water is less for them to drink.
Yeah, I would say, you know, what we sometimes do with Wonders of the Mekong is that, or what I do at FISHBIO is that if I write a story, I will ask the scientists to check it and make sure that the conclusions that I've drawn or the messages that I have shared are backed up by the science. So, you know, it might not be accurate to say that if we lose the dolphins, we're running out of water, but it might be more accurate to say if we lose the dolphins, then it means that we don't have a healthy freshwater, you know, river system. And so that might affect the fish that, because dolphins, you know, they eat fish, people also eat fish. So if you have, you know, if the dolphin is an indicator of a healthy freshwater ecosystem, what can that mean for people? So one way of thinking about it is, you know, more dolphins means a healthier river, and a healthier river can benefit people. So I think there is a way to connect those dots, but you just have to make sure that we're doing it kind of in an accurate way. So I would say, you know, because I would run it maybe by the scientists at your organization and see what they think about it.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for this great discussion. Yeah, I encourage you to, you know, keep reaching out to us. We can continue this topic, you know, on our Facebook page and elsewhere. And you can also email us if you have other questions, but I think we'll end it there. So thanks for staying on a little bit longer, everyone. And I appreciate all of you joining the training.
Thank you to Erin for staying up late. It's been like 10:30 now in the US. So
let me go to bed.
yeah.
Well, have a great day, everyone.
Yeah,
and,
have a great day.
Yeah,
Thank you.
look forward to continuing discussion further.
Yeah. Thank you everyone. Thank you the organizer. អរគុណចំពោះការចូលរួមរបស់អ្នកទាំងអស់គ្នាហើយអរគុណចំពោះអ្នករៀបចំដែលបានប្រឹងប្រែងរៀបចំកម្មវិធីនេះកាន់សូមអរគុណសូមជម្រាបលា
អរគុណErin អរគុណ Samadi.
Yes, thank you to Samadi for translating, and thank you to Loury for facilitating. Both very big jobs. I appreciate it.
Should we still have a discussion after this or not?
Sure, yeah, we can do a quick debrief maybe once the